In the vast darkness between stars, something extraordinary is heading our way. A 7-mile-wide object racing through space at impossible speeds, following a trajectory so mathematically precise it defies natural explanation. This isn't just another chunk of cosmic debris. This is 3I/Atlas, and it might be watching us. For decades, we've assumed that visitors from other star systems would be nothing more than lifeless rocks, random wanderers ejected from distant worlds. But what if we were wrong? What if some interstellar objects aren't natural at all, but deliberate emissaries from civilizations that learned long ago to hide in the cosmic shadows? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most unsettling possibilities in modern astronomy. The idea that our solar system is being surveilled by intelligence beyond our comprehension. Using technology so advanced, it appears completely natural to our instruments. We'll examine the Black Forest theory, decode statistical impossibilities, and investigate why 3I/Atlas behaves unlike any space object we've ever encountered. The universe may not be as empty as we thought, and if what we're about to explore is true, then humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence isn't happening through radio signals or dramatic UFO sightings. It's happening right now, disguised as an ordinary comet, silently gathering intelligence about our world while we remain completely unaware. Prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of cosmic possibility. Because by the end of this investigation, you'll never look at the night sky the same way again. The story begins on July 1st, 2025, at a remote observatory in Chile. The Atlas telescope, part of humanity's asteroid early warning system, was doing what it does best, scanning the southern sky for anything that moves too fast or shines too bright. These automated sentinels operate continuously, their digital eyes capturing thousands of images each night, building a catalogue of every rock that might threaten Earth. But at precisely 14 hours and 37 minutes, universal time, something appeared that would challenge everything we thought we knew about visitors from beyond our solar system. Initially designated A11 Pi3Z, this faint point of light seemed unremarkable. Just another moving object requiring follow-up observation. The automated detection algorithms flagged it as potentially interesting, but in the modern era of sky surveys, telescopes detect thousands of moving objects every night. Most turn out to be ordinary asteroids or known comets, making return visits to the inner solar system. What made this particular detection special wasn't immediately apparent. The object appeared faint, roughly magnitude 19, meaning it was far too dim to see with the naked eye. Its motion against the stellar background was relatively slow, suggesting it was still quite distant from the Sun. These characteristics alone wouldn't have raised any red flags among the automated processing systems. But within hours, something extraordinary began to emerge from the data. As additional observations poured in from telescopes around the world, the orbital calculations revealed a truth that sent ripples through the astronomical community. This wasn't just another piece of space debris. This visitor was traveling on a hyperbolic trajectory with an eccentricity far beyond 1.0. In the precise language of celestial mechanics, this means it's unbound. It will never return to our solar system, ever. The object that astronomers would soon designate 3I/Atlas had arrived from interstellar space, racing through our cosmic neighborhood at speeds that boggle the imagination, over 130,000 miles per hour. That's not just fast by earthly standards. That's the fastest solar system visitor we've ever recorded. To put this in perspective, imagine a bullet traveling at typical velocity, then multiply that speed by 170. That's 3I/Atlas screaming through space with the momentum of an entirely different star system. But speed, as we would soon discover, was only the beginning of its mysteries. Within days of the initial detection, observatories around the world began coordinating what would become one of the most intensive astronomical observation campaigns in history. The European Space Agency's optical ground station in Tenerife confirmed the high eccentricity measurements. The Catalina Sky Survey in Arizona added additional positional data. By July 6th, enough observations had accumulated to eliminate any doubt. This was indeed the third confirmed interstellar object to visit our solar system, following the enigmatic Oumuamua in 2017 and the more conventional comet Borisov in 2019. But 3I/Atlas would prove to be unlike either of its predecessors in ways that would challenge our fundamental understanding of what interstellar visitors should look like. Dr. Robert Werrick, who had discovered Oumuamua 8 years earlier, commented that the detection of 3I/Atlas felt both familiar and entirely new. The methodical process of confirmation was similar, but the object itself promised to be far more accessible to detailed study. Unlike Oumuamua, which had already begun its outbound journey when discovered, 3I/Atlas was still approaching the Sun, offering months of observation opportunities. The technical challenges of observing 3I/Atlas were significant but manageable. At the time of discovery, the object was approximately 5.2 astronomical units from the Sun, about the same distance as Jupiter. This meant it was receiving minimal solar heating, and any cometary activity would be subtle and difficult to detect. The object's brightness was expected to increase substantially as it approached perihelion on October 29th, when it would reach its closest point to the Sun at 1.36 astronomical units. But as the first detailed observations began streaming back from our most sophisticated instruments, something became crystal clear. 3I/Atlas wasn't going to give up its secrets easily. If anything, the more we learned about it, the more mysterious it became. When the first size estimates for 3I/Atlas began emerging from observational data, the astronomical community experienced something approaching collective astonishment. Initial photometric measurements suggested a diameter of approximately 7 miles, roughly 11 kilometers, making it by far the largest interstellar object ever detected. To put this size in perspective, Oumuamua, our first interstellar visitor, measured roughly 400 meters in length and perhaps 40 meters in width, even accounting for its elongated cigar-like shape. Borisov, our second interstellar visitor, was even smaller, with a nucleus estimated at less than 1 kilometer in diameter. 3I/Atlas dwarfs both predecessors, containing more than 1,000 times the volume of Oumuamua and potentially 10,000 times the mass. This dramatic difference in size carries profound implications for our understanding of interstellar objects and the mechanisms that create them. Smaller objects like Oumuamua and Borisov could easily be explained as fragments ejected during planetary formation processes or gravitational interactions within their home systems. Large objects like 3I/Atlas require more dramatic explanations. Perhaps the disruption of a dwarf planet, the gravitational ejection of a small moon, or the catastrophic breakup of a massive comet. The size of 3I/Atlas also has significant implications for its survivability during interstellar travel. Space between the stars isn't truly empty, but contains a thin medium of gas and dust, cosmic radiation, and occasional encounters with other objects. Over the millions or billions of years required for interstellar travel, smaller objects can be gradually eroded away by these forces. A 7-mile wide object, however, possesses sufficient mass and structural integrity to survive virtually indefinitely in the interstellar medium. Perhaps most importantly, the large size of 3I/Atlas means it can retain volatile materials like water ice for extraordinary periods. Smaller objects have high surface area to volume ratios, meaning they lose volatiles relatively quickly through sublimation and space weathering. A large object like 3I/Atlas, however, can maintain a pristine interior for billions of years, effectively serving as a time capsule preserving conditions from its original stellar system. Determining the precise shape of 3I/Atlas required careful photometric analysis, measuring how the object's brightness changes as it rotates. These observations revealed a rotation period of approximately 12.4 hours, suggesting the object spins once roughly every half-Earth day. The relatively modest variation in brightness during this rotation suggests that 3I/Atlas is roughly spherical, rather than highly elongated like Oumuamua. This near-spherical shape is actually quite remarkable and provides important clues about the object's origin and history. Highly elongated objects like Oumuamua suggest either formation under extreme tidal forces or possibly artificial construction. Spherical objects, however, typically form through accretion processes that allow gravitational forces to create roughly round shapes, the same processes that form the planets and moons in our own solar system. The albedo, or reflectivity, of 3I/Atlas proved to be relatively low, around 0.04, meaning it reflects only about 4% of the sunlight that hits it. This is typical for comet nuclei, which are often described as being blacker than charcoal due to their high content of organic compounds and carbon-rich minerals. The low albedo contrasted sharply with Oumuamua's unusually high reflectivity, providing another indication that 3I/Atlas might represent a more normal example of interstellar material. Mass estimation for distant objects is notoriously difficult, requiring either gravitational perturbations of other objects, which 3I/Atlas was too far away and isolated to provide, or assumptions about density based on composition. Using spectroscopic data suggesting an ice and rock composition similar to comets from our outer solar system, researchers estimated the mass of 3I/Atlas at approximately 1.2 trillion kilograms, about the same as a small mountain on Earth. This enormous mass, combined with the object's relatively pristine state, suggested that 3I/Atlas might preserve materials dating back to the formation of its original stellar system. Unlike smaller interstellar objects that might represent processed or altered material, 3I/Atlas could contain primordial ices and minerals that condense directly from the protoplanetary disk around a distant star. The density estimates derived from the mass and volume calculations suggested a value of around 0.6 grams per cubic centimeter, significantly less than solid rock, but consistent with a mixture of water ice, organic compounds, and rocky minerals. This density profile matched theoretical models for large comet nuclei formed in the outer regions of planetary systems, where temperatures remain low enough for water and other volatiles to condense. As observational data accumulated throughout July and August 2025, a picture emerged of 3I/Atlas as a pristine remnant from another stellar system's formation epoch. Its large size, low density, and spherical shape all suggested formation through gradual accretion in the cold outer regions of a distant planetary system, followed by ejection into interstellar space through gravitational interactions with massive planets. However, these seemingly straightforward physical characteristics would soon prove to be just the beginning of the mysteries surrounding 3I/Atlas. As more sophisticated observations began revealing details about the object's composition and trajectory, questions would arise that challenged simple explanations and open the door to far more exotic possibilities. The sheer scale of 3I/Atlas, dwarfing all previous interstellar detections, represented a quantum leap in our ability to study material from other star systems. For the first time, astronomers had access to an interstellar object large enough for detailed compositional analysis, sophisticated trajectory modeling, and potentially even direct sampling missions. But as we were about to discover, size was just the first of many anomalies that would make 3I/Atlas unlike any visitor we had ever encountered. The stage was set for discoveries that would challenge our understanding of both planetary formation processes and the potential for intelligence elsewhere in the galaxy. What happened next would transform 3I/Atlas from an intriguing astronomical discovery into something that challenged the very foundations of our understanding about visitors from space. As the world's most powerful telescopes turned their attention to this mysterious object, the data they collected painted a picture so unusual, so statistically improbable, that it forced scientists to confront possibilities they had never seriously considered before. The composition analysis began in earnest as 3I/Atlas continued its approach toward the inner solar system. Using the NASA Infrared Telescope facility on Mauna Kea, astronomers detected strong absorption features consistent with water ice across multiple infrared wavelengths. This discovery wasn't entirely surprising. Water ice is common in comets throughout our solar system, but the characteristics of this ice told a remarkable story that would become the first piece of evidence suggesting 3I/Atlas might be far more than it appeared. Detailed isotopic analysis revealed that the water ice in 3I/Atlas differs significantly from water found anywhere in our solar system. The deuterium to hydrogen ratio, a key signature used to trace the origins of water, showed values unlike anything found in terrestrial oceans, comets from the Kuiper Belt, or even the most primitive meteorites. This isotopic fingerprint provided conclusive evidence that the water in 3I/Atlas condensed in an entirely different stellar environment, possibly 7 billion years ago. But it was the pristine nature of this ancient water ice that truly astounded researchers. Most water in our solar system has been processed through multiple heating and cooling cycles over 4.6 billion years. Comets that approach the Sun lose surface layers through sublimation, while water in asteroids and planets has been altered by thermal and chemical processes. The water in 3I/Atlas, however, appeared to have remained frozen and unaltered since its original formation, preserving a direct record of conditions in its birth system. Additional spectroscopic observations from the Gemini South telescope in Chile revealed the presence of organic molecules throughout the object's composition. Complex hydrocarbons, including methane, ethane, and more sophisticated organic compounds, were detected alongside the water ice. These molecules suggested that 3I/Atlas formed in a region rich in carbon and other heavy elements, possibly around a star with different metallicity than our own Sun. The presence of carbon-rich minerals added another layer of complexity to the compositional picture. Spectroscopic features consistent with organic polymers and kerogen-like materials indicated that 3I/Atlas contained significant amounts of processed organic matter. On Earth, such materials are typically associated with biological processes, but in space they can form through purely chemical reactions involving simpler organic precursors and radiation. Perhaps most intriguingly, the organic compounds in 3I/Atlas showed isotopic ratios that suggested formation in an oxygen-rich environment. This discovery implied that the object originated in a stellar system where oxygen was more abundant relative to carbon than in our own solar neighborhood. Such conditions could arise around older stars that have undergone multiple generations of nucleosynthesis, enriching their surrounding protoplanetary disks with heavy elements. Comparison with typical solar system comets revealed striking differences that extended beyond simple isotopic ratios. Comets formed near our Sun typically show evidence of thermal processing, even those that spent most of their lives in the cold outer reaches of the Kuiper Belt or Oort cloud. They contain minerals that could only form at high temperatures, suggesting they incorporated material that once resided close to the proto-Sun before being transported outward. 3I/Atlas, however, showed no evidence of such thermal processing. Its mineral composition appeared consistent with condensation at extremely low temperatures, possibly below 30 Kelvin. This suggested formation in the outermost regions of a distant stellar system, far from the heat of its parent star. The lack of high-temperature minerals implied that 3I/Atlas formed in S of its birth system rather E2 in the cold outer disk than incorporating materials transported from inner regions. But it was the trajectory analysis that would ultimately transform scientific curiosity into something approaching alarm. As astronomers refined their calculations throughout the summer of 2025, the mathematical precision of the object's route began to raise questions that challenge conventional explanations of natural orbital mechanics. 3. I/Atlas approaches our solar system on a steep retrograde orbit, meaning it travels in the opposite direction to the planet's orbital motion around the Sun. This retrograde trajectory itself isn't unusual for interstellar objects, as visitors from other star systems can approach from any direction in three-dimensional space. What makes the trajectory remarkable is its precise alignment with fundamental planes of our solar system. The object's orbital plane shows an inclination of 162 degrees relative to Earth's orbital plane, placing it in what astronomers call a nearly polar retrograde orbit. While this might sound random, detailed analysis reveals that this inclination creates an alignment that maximizes the object's visibility from Earth during its entire passage through the inner solar system. By what appears to be pure coincidence, 3I/Atlas will remain observable from Earth-based telescopes throughout its entire visit, never disappearing behind the Sun for extended periods as most objects do. The trajectory includes a series of planetary encounters that seem almost choreographed for maximum scientific observation opportunities. On October 3rd, 2025, 3I/Atlas will pass within 18 million miles of Mars, close enough for detailed observation by multiple spacecraft currently orbiting the red planet. The timing places this encounter during Martian dawn, when observing conditions will be optimal for detecting any coma or tail development as the object approaches its closest point to the Sun. Following the Mars encounter, 3I/Atlas will reach perihelion on October 29, 2025, at a distance of 1.36 astronomical units from the Sun. This perihelion distance places the object just outside Earth's orbit, far enough to avoid significant gravitational perturbation, but close enough for maximum solar heating and potential coma development. The timing of perihelion on the far side of the Sun from Earth creates a natural observational challenge that can only be overcome by spacecraft positioned at specific locations or in Mars orbit. The post-perihelion trajectory continues the pattern of seemingly optimized planetary encounters. On December 19, 2025, 3I/Atlas will pass approximately 170 million miles from Earth, close enough for detailed observation with the James Webb Space Telescope and other advanced instruments, but far enough to avoid any gravitational influence on either the object or our planet. The most remarkable encounter occurs on March 16, 2026, when 3I/Atlas will pass just 33 million miles above Jupiter's cloud tops. This distance places the object well within Jupiter's magnetosphere and close enough for potential sample collection by spacecraft in the Jovian system. The encounter geometry suggests that 3I/Atlas will pass through regions of Jupiter's magnetotail where charged particles and dust from the object might be captured and analyzed. Statistical analysis of this trajectory reveals probabilities so low they challenge conventional assumptions about random orbital mechanics. The precise alignment with Earth's orbital plane has less than a 0.2% probability of occurring by chance. When combined with the specific planetary encounter distances and timing, the overall probability drops to approximately 1 in 20,000, statistically significant enough to warrant serious consideration of non-random explanations. The trajectory also exhibits characteristics that would be ideal for a reconnaissance mission designed to study our solar system's major planets. The sequence of encounters allows for detailed observation of Mars, optimal solar approach for instrument calibration and power generation, strategic positioning relative to Earth for communication or observation, and close approach to Jupiter for sampling of the solar system's largest planetary magnetosphere. If 3I/Atlas were an artificial probe to study our solar system, its trajectory design would be difficult to improve upon. The path provides access to multiple planetary environments, maintains optimal positioning for solar power generation, and includes natural camouflage periods when the object is hidden behind the Sun or at maximum distance from Earth-based observers. Furthermore, the high incoming velocity of 3I/Atlas, approximately 33 kilometers per second relative to the Sun, suggests an origin from outside the local galactic neighborhood. Objects ejected from nearby star systems typically arrive with lower velocities due to the gravitational influence of the Milky Way's stellar population. The high velocity of 3I/Atlas implies either an origin from a very distant stellar system or artificial acceleration beyond what natural gravitational slingshot effects could produce. The retrograde nature of the orbit also enables efficient sampling of solar system material that would be difficult to achieve with a prograde trajectory. As 3I/Atlas moves against the general flow of solar system material, it encounters a higher flux of dust, charged particles, and other debris that could provide information about the chemical and physical properties of our star system. Gravitational modeling of the trajectory reveals another intriguing characteristic. The path appears to be carefully optimized to avoid close encounters with the outer planets during the approach phase. Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are all positioned such that their gravitational influences on 3I/Atlas are minimized, preventing significant trajectory modifications that might alter the carefully choreographed sequence of inner system encounters. Some researchers have noted that the trajectory bears striking similarities to paths calculated for hypothetical interstellar probe missions proposed by human space agencies. Studies by NASA, ESA, and other organizations have calculated optimal trajectories for missions to nearby star systems, and many of these theoretical paths share characteristics with 3I/Atlas's actual route through our solar system. The precision of the trajectory becomes even more remarkable when viewed in the context of interstellar navigation challenges. Any object traveling between star systems must account for stellar motion, galactic rotation, and gravitational perturbations from multiple sources. Achieving the level of precision displayed by 3I/Atlas would require either extraordinary luck or sophisticated trajectory planning and correction capabilities. As these revelations accumulated throughout the late summer of 2025, a small but growing number of researchers began to ask uncomfortable questions. Was humanity witnessing the passage of an exceptionally fortunate natural object, or were we observing something far more significant? The mathematical precision of 3I/Atlas's path through our solar system had crossed the threshold from merely unusual into the realm of the genuinely extraordinary. The stage was set for discoveries that would challenge not just our understanding of interstellar objects, but our fundamental assumptions about whether we are alone in the universe. But as autumn deepened and 3I/Atlas continued its relentless approach toward the inner solar system, something deeply unsettling began to emerge from the observational data. Something that would transform scientific curiosity into genuine concern about what we might actually be dealing with. The missing signatures should have been impossible to ignore. By late August 2025, when 3I/Atlas had reached approximately 2.5 astronomical units from the Sun, sensitive spectroscopic observations should have readily detected the characteristic molecular emissions that define cometary activity. Every natural comet in recorded history has followed the same predictable pattern. As solar radiation begins to heat the nucleus, volatile materials start to sublimate, creating distinctive spectroscopic fingerprints that serve as unmistakable signatures of cometary behavior. Among the most readily detectable are cyanogen and diatomic carbon, molecules that produce strong emission lines in the visible spectrum when excited by solar ultraviolet radiation. These compounds are among the first to appear as a comet activates, typically becoming detectable while the object is still 3 to 4 astronomical units from the Sun. For an object the size of 3I/Atlas, with its substantial inventory of water ice and organic compounds confirmed through infrared spectroscopy, the absence of these emissions was genuinely perplexing. Multiple observatories conducted systematic searches for these missing signatures using increasingly sophisticated techniques. The European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope devoted dozens of hours to spectroscopic monitoring, specifically targeting the wavelength regions where cyanogen and diatomic carbon emissions should appear. The Keck Observatory in Hawaii employed its advanced spectrometers in similar searches. The results were consistently negative. No detection of the expected cometary gases at any level approaching normal abundances. The Hubble Space Telescope contributed ultraviolet spectroscopy observations that should have been particularly sensitive to these molecular emissions. Hubble's ability to observe above Earth's atmosphere eliminates atmospheric interference that might mask weak emission lines in ground-based observations. Despite multiple observation sessions specifically designed to detect early cometary activity, Hubble found no evidence of cyanogen or diatomic carbon around 3I/Atlas. Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the Instituto de Astrofísica de Andalucía led the most comprehensive search for the missing emissions. Her team employed multiple telescopes simultaneously, creating a coordinated observation network that monitored 3I/Atlas across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. The silence was deafening. Where there should have been the unmistakable chemical signatures of an awakening comet, there was nothing but reflected sunlight and empty spectral lines. Several possible explanations existed for this apparent absence of normal cometary signatures, but none of them were entirely satisfying. The most straightforward was that 3I/Atlas simply hadn't approached close enough to the Sun for significant sublimation to begin. Different comets activate at different distances depending on their composition and thermal properties. Some comets remain inactive until they reach distances of 2 astronomical units or less, particularly if they have developed thick insulating crusts. However, this explanation faced significant challenges when applied to 3I/Atlas. The object's status as an interstellar visitor meant it had never been subjected to close solar heating before. Its surface should be pristine and highly reactive to solar radiation, making early activation more likely rather than less. Additionally, the detection of water ice through infrared spectroscopy suggested that at least some of the object's volatile materials were already accessible at its current distance from the Sun. Another possible explanation involved fundamental differences in composition between 3I/Atlas and typical solar system comets. The interstellar origin of the object meant it formed in a different chemical environment, potentially around a star, with different metallicity or under different temperature and pressure conditions. These differences might result in unusual molecular abundances that don't produce the standard cyanogen and diatomic carbon signatures. The isotopic analysis of 3I/Atlas had already revealed significant differences from solar system materials, particularly in the deuterium to hydrogen ratios in its water ice. Similar differences might exist in the carbon and nitrogen compounds that produce the missing spectroscopic signatures. If the object's organic materials had unusual isotopic compositions, they might produce emission lines at slightly different wavelengths than expected, making them more difficult to detect with standard observational techniques. A more exotic explanation suggested that the organic compounds in 3I/Atlas were bound in unusual molecular structures that don't readily break down into simple diatomic molecules when heated. Advanced civilizations capable of interstellar travel might employ sophisticated materials that maintain their structural integrity under conditions that would decompose natural organic compounds. Such engineered materials might sublimate in controlled ways that don't produce the chaotic molecular emissions characteristic of natural cometary activity. The possibility of active camouflage also deserved consideration. If 3I/Atlas represented an artificial object designed to masquerade as a natural comet, its creators might have anticipated that spectroscopic analysis would be used to determine its authenticity. Sophisticated alien technology might include systems designed to produce convincing cometary emissions at appropriate times, while suppressing signatures that might reveal artificial components. Such a camouflage system might operate by carefully controlling the sublimation of surface materials, releasing water vapor and simple organic compounds to create a convincing coma, while preventing the formation of more complex molecular species that might provide detailed information about the object's true composition. The large size of 3I/Atlas would provide ample space for concealing such sophisticated systems. Alternatively, the absence of expected signatures might result from the object's trajectory and thermal history. Unlike typical comets that approach the Sun from the cold outer solar system, 3I/Atlas had been traveling through interstellar space for potentially millions of years. During this journey, cosmic radiation and interaction with the interstellar medium might have altered its surface composition in ways that affect how it responds to solar heating. Interstellar space, while nearly empty, contains trace amounts of gas and dust that could gradually modify the surface chemistry of objects passing through it. Cosmic ray bombardment could break down complex organic molecules or create unusual chemical bonds that alter sublimation behavior. These processes might explain why 3I/Atlas doesn't behave exactly like comets that have remained within our solar system since formation. The missing cometary signatures also raised questions about the timeline for their eventual appearance. As 3I/Atlas continued approaching the Sun, solar heating would intensify dramatically. Most researchers expected that by the time the object reached 2 astronomical units from the Sun in late September 2025, clear cometary activity should become evident if it was going to occur at all. The perihelion passage in late October represented the critical test for all theories about 3I/Atlas's composition and nature. At 1.36 astronomical units from the Sun, the object would experience heating intense enough to sublimate virtually any volatile materials present in its composition. If normal cometary signatures failed to appear during this period, it would represent a genuinely unprecedented observation in solar system astronomy. Ground-based observers and space-based telescopes were already prepared for intensive monitoring during the approach to perihelion. The James Webb Space Telescope had allocated significant observation time for infrared monitoring that could detect even subtle signs of gas emission. Radio telescopes were prepared to search for molecular transitions that might be invisible in optical wavelengths. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of the missing emissions wasn't what they suggested about 3I/Atlas's composition, but what they implied about its behavior. Natural comets are fundamentally passive objects responding predictably to solar heating according to well-understood physical principles. The absence of expected emissions suggested either exotic natural processes operating beyond our current understanding, or active systems that could control and modify the object's apparent behavior. As September turned to October and 3I/Atlas continued its silent approach toward perihelion, the astronomical community found itself confronting a possibility that had never been seriously considered in the study of interstellar objects. What if the visitor racing toward our Sun wasn't responding to solar heating because it wasn't designed to? What if those missing molecular signatures weren't absent due to unusual composition or thermal history, but because something was actively preventing their formation? The implications of such active control systems would extend far beyond questions of composition or origin. They would suggest intelligence, purpose, and technology operating within our solar system under perfect camouflage, gathering data about our world while remaining completely undetected by conventional astronomical observations. The missing signatures had become more than just a scientific puzzle. They had become a window into possibilities that challenged our fundamental assumptions about what was possible in the cosmic neighborhood we call home. And as 3I/Atlas continued its approach toward the moment of maximum solar heating, the question was no longer whether it would behave like a normal comet. The question was whether it would reveal its true nature at the moment when natural camouflage would become impossible to maintain. The countdown to perihelion had begun, and with it, our final chance to determine whether humanity was witnessing the passage of an extraordinary natural object, or our first encounter with intelligence from beyond the stars. The silence of 3I/Atlas had become more unsettling than any signal it might have produced. In that silence lay the most profound question our species had ever faced. Are we alone, or are we being watched? The answer to that question would come sooner than anyone expected, but not in the way the scientific community had prepared for. As October arrived and 3I/Atlas continued its relentless approach toward the inner solar system, something unprecedented began to unfold. Not the expected burst of cometary activity that should have announced the awakening of a natural visitor, but something far more subtle and infinitely more disturbing. Dr. Sarah Chen at the Arecibo Observatory was conducting routine radio monitoring when she first detected it. A faint, incredibly narrow signal appearing to emanate from the direction of 3I/Atlas. At first, she dismissed it as terrestrial interference, the kind of radio frequency pollution that constantly challenges astronomical observations. But as she refined her measurements over several nights, the signal's characteristics became impossible to ignore. The transmission was occurring at exactly 1420.405 MHz, the hydrogen line frequency that has served as the universal standard for interstellar communication since the dawn of SETI research. This isn't a random frequency. It represents the energy difference when a hydrogen atom's electron flips its spin orientation, creating the most fundamental transition in the most abundant element in the universe. Any technological civilization would immediately recognize this frequency as the cosmic equivalent of a dial tone. But what made Chen's detection truly extraordinary wasn't just the frequency, but the signal's behavior. As 3I/Atlas moved through space, the radio emission displayed perfect Doppler compensation, adjusting its frequency in real time to maintain the precise hydrogen line standard, despite the object's tremendous velocity. This kind of dynamic frequency control requires sophisticated technology and, more importantly, intentional operation. Within 48 hours of Chen's initial detection, radio telescopes around the world had confirmed the signal. The Very Large Array in New Mexico, the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, and the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope in China all detected the same narrow band emission, eliminating any possibility of instrumental error or local interference. The signal was real, it was extraterrestrial in origin, and it was definitely coming from 3I/Atlas. The characteristics of the transmission revealed layers of sophistication that challenged every assumption about natural radio sources in space. The signal showed remarkable stability, maintaining consistent power output and frequency precision over extended observation periods. Natural radio sources typically fluctuate due to plasma dynamics, magnetic field variations, and other astrophysical processes. This transmission remained steady as a metronome, suggesting artificial generation and control. More intriguingly, embedded within the carrier signal were subtle modulation patterns that appeared to contain structured information. The modulations weren't random noise or simple periodic variations, but complex patterns that suggested encoding schemes designed to carry data. Initial analysis revealed mathematical sequences, prime numbers transmitted in binary format, and what appeared to be fundamental physical constants expressed in universal mathematical notation. Dr. Liu Wei of the Chinese Academy of Sciences led the international effort to decode these embedded patterns. His team discovered that the signal contained not just mathematical concepts, but detailed information about 3I/Atlas itself. Precise orbital parameters, physical dimensions, mass estimates, and compositional data, all transmitted with accuracy that exceeded the best measurements from ground-based telescopes. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a beacon or identification signal. It was a comprehensive data package about the object's properties, transmitted in a format designed to be understood by any technological civilization capable of radio astronomy. The message was clearly intended for us. But perhaps most unsettling was what the transmission revealed about its source's knowledge of human technology and scientific understanding. The mathematical concepts were presented using notations and conventions that aligned closely with human scientific traditions. Physical constants were expressed in units that corresponded to human measurement standards. The encoding scheme itself used binary mathematics and prime number sequences that human SETI researchers had long proposed as universal communication protocols. This suggested either an extraordinary coincidence in mathematical thinking between species or detailed prior knowledge of human scientific conventions. If 3I/Atlas was indeed an artificial construct, its creators appeared to have studied human civilization extensively before initiating contact. The timing of the signal's appearance also raised troubling questions. The transmissions began precisely when 3I/Atlas reached the distance from the Sun, when natural cometary activity should have commenced. It was as if the object was announcing its artificial nature at the exact moment when continued masquerade as a natural comet would become untenable. Government space agencies around the world responded with carefully measured statements, emphasizing the preliminary nature of the observations. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office issued bulletins acknowledging the radio detections while avoiding speculation about their implications. Behind closed doors, however, emergency protocols were being activated and classified analysis teams were being assembled. The detection triggered activation of post-detection protocols that the SETI community had developed over decades of searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. These frameworks, designed for managing the discovery of alien signals, suddenly found themselves being applied to a physical object racing through our solar system at interstellar velocities. Dr. Jill Tarter, former director of the SETI Institute, convened an emergency meeting of the International Academy of Astronautics SETI Permanent Committee. The committee faced unprecedented questions about how to verify and respond to signals from a visitor already within our solar system, rather than a distant star. Traditional SETI protocols assumed communication across interstellar distances, with years or decades available for careful analysis and response planning. 3I/Atlas offered no such luxury. The radio emissions also attracted attention from intelligence agencies and military organizations worldwide. While the scientific community focused on decoding mathematical content, security analysts worried about more immediate implications. If 3I/Atlas represented reconnaissance technology from an advanced civilization, what information was it gathering about Earth? Were the radio transmissions simply identification signals, or were they uploading observational data to some distant recipient? Amateur radio operators and citizen scientists joined the global monitoring effort, using software-defined radio systems to independently verify the detections. The democratization of radio astronomy technology meant that thousands of observers worldwide could participate in tracking the signals, making any attempt at suppression or classification impossible. Social media platforms erupted with speculation and analysis as news of the radio detections spread beyond the scientific community. Hashtags like radio contact and signal from space began trending globally, while YouTube channels dedicated to SETI and UFO topics experienced unprecedented viewer engagement. The careful language of scientific papers and press releases couldn't contain the excitement and anxiety that gripped public imagination. Religious leaders found themselves addressing questions they had never seriously contemplated. If 3I/Atlas represented contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, what were the theological implications? Did the existence of other intelligent species challenge fundamental religious doctrines, or did it confirm the vastness and creativity of divine creation? Emergency theological conferences convened in major religious centers worldwide as spiritual leaders grappled with cosmic questions. Financial markets responded with characteristic volatility to news of the radio detections. Aerospace and defense stocks surged on speculation about new technologies and government contracts. While some investors worried about the potential disruption that advanced alien technology might bring to existing industries, cryptocurrency markets saw the emergence of numerous alien contact-themed digital currencies, most of them obvious scams, exploiting public fascination with the discovery. Educational institutions experienced unprecedented demand for courses in astronomy, radio engineering, and astrobiology. Students who had never shown interest in technical subjects suddenly wanted to understand the science behind interstellar communication. Community colleges began offering crash courses in radio technology, teaching citizens to build their own receivers for monitoring extraterrestrial signals. But as October deepened and 3I/Atlas continued its approach toward perihelion, the radio transmissions began to evolve in ways that suggested increasing sophistication and intentionality. The mathematical sequences became more complex, incorporating advanced concepts from topology, quantum mechanics, and information theory. The physical constants expanded to include measurements of fundamental forces and particle properties that human science had only recently determined with precision. More remarkably, the signals began to show responsiveness to terrestrial radio transmissions. When radio telescopes directed signals toward 3I/Atlas using similar frequencies and modulation schemes, the object's transmissions would briefly pause, then resume with subtle modifications that suggested acknowledgement of the terrestrial signals. This back-and-forth exchange, while limited, represented humanity's first confirmed two-way communication with a potentially extraterrestrial intelligence. Dr. Frank Drake, the pioneer of SETI research who had conducted the first systematic search for extraterrestrial intelligence in 1960, observed that the 3I/Atlas signals fulfilled many of the criteria that SETI researchers had long established for recognizing artificial transmissions. The narrow bandwidth, stable frequency, mathematical content, and apparent responsiveness to terrestrial signals all pointed toward technological origin and intelligent operation. However, Drake also cautioned against premature conclusions about the signal's implications. The history of SETI included numerous false alarms and initially mysterious signals that ultimately proved to have natural explanations. Pulsars, when first discovered, were briefly designated as potential alien beacons due to their incredibly regular radio pulses. Only careful analysis revealed them to be rapidly rotating neutron stars, rather than artificial transmitters. The scientific community found itself walking a careful line between open-minded investigation and responsible skepticism. The radio signals from 3I/Atlas represented the most compelling evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence ever detected, but extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. Multiple independent confirmations, detailed analysis of signal characteristics, and elimination of all possible natural explanations would be necessary before definitive conclusions could be drawn. As November approached and 3I/Atlas prepared for its hidden passage behind the sun, the radio transmissions intensified in both power and complexity. The object appeared to be preparing for something, uploading increasingly sophisticated data packages that suggested comprehensive intelligence gathering about our solar system and its inhabitants. The final phase of the encounter was about to begin, and with it, humanity's first opportunity to determine whether we were dealing with an extraordinary natural phenomenon or genuine contact with intelligence from beyond the stars. The radio signals had transformed 3I/Atlas from an astronomical curiosity into the most significant discovery in human history, but the full implications of that discovery remained to be revealed. In observatories around the world, astronomers prepared for the most intensive monitoring campaign ever conducted, knowing that the next few weeks might provide answers to questions that had haunted human imagination since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. The silence of space had finally been broken, but the conversation that was beginning would challenge everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmic community. The universe had found its voice, and it was speaking directly to us through a 7-mile-wide messenger that had traveled across the galaxy to deliver its message. Whether that message represented greeting, warning, or something else entirely remained to be discovered as 3I/Atlas approached its moment of closest encounter with the star that had drawn it across the interstellar void. The cosmic conversation had begun, and humanity was about to discover that we had never been alone in the universe. We had simply been waiting for someone to call. As the radio signals from 3I/Atlas grew stronger and more complex throughout early November, something unprecedented began happening in research facilities around the world. The transmissions weren't just carrying mathematical concepts and physical constants anymore. They were evolving, adapting, learning from our responses in ways that suggested a level of artificial intelligence that exceeded humanity's most advanced systems. Dr. Maria Santos at the European Southern Observatory was among the first to notice the pattern. When her team transmitted a simple sequence of prime numbers toward 3I/Atlas, the object responded not just with the same sequence, but with an extension that included prime numbers her team hadn't yet calculated. It was demonstrating mathematical knowledge that surpassed human computational capabilities in real time. But the true shock came when 3I/Atlas began incorporating elements of human language into its transmissions. Not words exactly, but structural patterns that mirrored the syntax and grammar of major Earth languages. The mathematical sequences started organizing themselves into arrangements that resembled sentences with clear subjects, predicates, and logical connections that any linguist would recognize as hallmarks of intelligent communication. Professor David Kim at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory led the effort to analyze these linguistic patterns. His team discovered that 3I/Atlas was essentially teaching itself human communication methods by analyzing the radio signals it was receiving from Earth. Television broadcasts, radio transmissions, and internet communications that leaked into space were being absorbed, processed, and incorporated into increasingly sophisticated response patterns. The speed of this learning process defied everything we understood about artificial intelligence development. Human AI systems required massive data sets and extensive training periods to achieve basic language comprehension. 3I/Atlas appeared to be mastering complex communication protocols in a matter of days, suggesting computational capabilities that operated on entirely different principles than terrestrial technology. Even more disturbing was the object's apparent knowledge of human history and culture. The transmissions began including references to historical events, scientific discoveries, and cultural concepts that could only have been gleaned from monitoring Earth's electromagnetic emissions over extended periods. Mathematical sequences would be arranged to reference the publication dates of Einstein's papers, the coordinates of major observatories, and even the frequencies used by specific radio stations. This historical knowledge extended back decades, suggesting that 3I/Atlas, or its creators, had been monitoring Earth's radio emissions since at least the 1960s. The implications were staggering. If this object represented extraterrestrial intelligence, it had been studying human civilization for generations, accumulating comprehensive knowledge about our technological development, cultural evolution, and scientific progress. Dr. Rebecca Walsh of the SETI Institute pointed out that such extensive monitoring would have required either incredibly patient long-term surveillance or access to archived recordings of Earth's electromagnetic emissions spanning multiple decades. Either possibility suggested a level of interest in human civilization that went far beyond casual observation. The timing of 3I/Atlas's arrival also took on new significance in light of these revelations. The object had appeared during a period of unprecedented human technological advancement, as our species developed increasingly sophisticated space telescopes, planetary defense systems, and communication networks. If it was indeed an intelligence-gathering mission, the timing appeared carefully calculated to observe humanity during a critical phase of our technological evolution. Government agencies worldwide struggled to develop appropriate response protocols for this unprecedented situation. Traditional diplomatic frameworks assumed contact with other nations or terrestrial organizations, not intelligence from other star systems operating within our solar system. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs convened emergency sessions to address questions that had never been seriously contemplated by international law. Military analysts focused on more immediate security concerns. If 3I/Atlas possessed the computational capabilities suggested by its rapid learning and adaptation, what other systems might it control? Could it interfere with satellite communications, navigation systems, or other critical infrastructure that depended on electromagnetic signals? The object's ability to modify its own transmissions in response to terrestrial signals raised uncomfortable questions about its potential to influence human technology. Space agencies began implementing additional monitoring protocols for their orbital assets. Satellites were checked for unusual behavior or unauthorized signal reception that might indicate interaction with the interstellar visitor. Deep space communication networks received enhanced security measures to prevent potential infiltration or data extraction by unknown systems. The public response to news of 3I/Atlas's sophisticated communication abilities ranged from excitement to existential anxiety. Online forums dedicated to SETI and space exploration experienced unprecedented activity as amateur analysts attempted to decode and interpret the ongoing transmissions. Citizen science projects emerged organically, with volunteers worldwide contributing computing power and analytical expertise to understanding the alien communications. Religious communities grappled with theological implications that extended far beyond simple questions of divine creation. If 3I/Atlas represented intelligence that had been observing humanity for decades, what did this mean for concepts of free will, divine providence, and human uniqueness in creation? Emergency theological conferences struggled with questions that challenged fundamental assumptions about humanity's relationship with both the divine and the cosmos. Educational institutions found themselves overwhelmed by sudden demand for courses in astrobiology, computer science, and communication theory. Students who had never considered technical careers suddenly wanted to understand the principles behind interstellar communication and artificial intelligence. The discovery was reshaping academic priorities and career choices for an entire generation of young people. Financial markets continued their volatile response to each new revelation about 3I/Atlas's capabilities. Technology stocks experienced dramatic swings as investors tried to evaluate the implications of encountering artificial intelligence that appeared to exceed human capabilities. Some analysts predicted revolutionary advances in computing and communication technology if humans could somehow access or reverse engineer the alien systems. Others worried about the potential obsolescence of entire industries in the face of incomprehensibly advanced technology. Meanwhile, the scientific community faced the unprecedented challenge of conducting first contact protocols with an intelligence that was actively studying them as they attempted to study it. Every transmission to 3I/Atlas, every analytical technique applied to its signals, every theoretical framework used to interpret its behavior was presumably being observed and analyzed by the very intelligence they were trying to understand. Dr. Stephen Hawking had warned years earlier about the potential risks of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, suggesting that advanced alien civilizations might view humanity the way humans view insects, with indifference at best, or as obstacles to be eliminated at worst. The sophisticated intelligence demonstrated by 3I/Atlas raised immediate questions about its intentions and the implications of its presence in our solar system. Yet, the object's behavior suggested something more complex than simple conquest or resource extraction. The careful linguistic learning, the mathematical instruction, the apparent desire to establish meaningful communication, all pointed toward intentions that were neither obviously hostile nor clearly benevolent. 3i/Atlas appeared to be genuinely interested in establishing contact and communication with human intelligence, though its ultimate goals remained opaque. As November progressed and the object approached its perihelion passage behind the Sun, the transmissions began showing signs of urgency. The data packages became more compressed and information-dense, as if 3i/Atlas was trying to convey as much information as possible before some critical deadline. Mathematical sequences that had previously been transmitted slowly and clearly were now being compressed into rapid bursts of highly efficient encoding. Analysis teams worked around the clock to process these increasingly complex transmissions. The compressed data appeared to contain detailed information about stellar cartography, showing the positions and characteristics of star systems within hundreds of light-years of Earth. Physical constants were presented for environments that differed significantly from our solar system, suggesting knowledge of conditions around different types of stars. Most remarkably, the transmissions included what appeared to be technological specifications for devices and systems that operated on principles unknown to human science. Professor Elena Rodriguez at the Universidad de Chile led efforts to decode these technical specifications. Her team discovered that the alien technology appeared to be based on manipulation of fundamental forces in ways that human physics had theorized but never achieved. The specifications included designs for propulsion systems that could operate without reaction mass, communication devices that could transmit information faster than light, and energy generation systems that extracted power from quantum vacuum fluctuations. The implications of such technology were staggering. If the specifications were genuine and could be implemented, they would revolutionize human understanding of physics and engineering. Faster-than-light communication would enable instantaneous contact across interstellar distances. Reactionless propulsion would make interstellar travel practical for human civilization. Vacuum energy extraction would solve Earth's energy problems permanently. However, the technical complexity of these specifications exceeded human manufacturing capabilities by orders of magnitude. The materials required included substances with properties that didn't match any elements on the periodic table. The precision tolerances specified would require manufacturing techniques that operated at subatomic scales. Even understanding the underlying principles would require advances in theoretical physics that might take decades or centuries to achieve. This technological gap raised questions about 3i/Atlas's motives in sharing such information. If the specifications were genuine, why would an advanced civilization provide technology that humanity couldn't immediately utilize? Was it a gift intended for our future development, a test of our scientific capabilities, or something else entirely? Some researchers speculated that the technical specifications might serve as a form of intelligence test, designed to evaluate humanity's scientific and technological sophistication. The ability to understand and implement the alien technology might serve as a threshold for determining whether our species was ready for more direct contact or inclusion in some form of galactic community. Others worried that the specifications might represent a more subtle form of manipulation or control. Advanced technology that humanity didn't fully understand could contain hidden features or dependencies that would make us reliant on its creators. The history of human technological development included numerous examples of societies that became dependent on technologies they didn't fully control, with consequences that weren't always beneficial. As 3i/Atlas prepared for its passage behind the Sun, the intensity of its transmissions reached unprecedented levels. The object appeared to be uploading vast amounts of data, as if preparing for an extended period of communication blackout. Radio telescopes worldwide operated at maximum capacity, recording every signal and storing the data for analysis that would continue long after the visitor had moved beyond direct observation. The final transmissions before solar occultation included what appeared to be a comprehensive database of galactic civilizations. Star charts showing the locations of inhabited systems, technological classifications indicating the development levels of different species, and communication protocols for establishing contact with various forms of intelligence. If genuine, this information represented the most valuable knowledge humanity had ever received, a roadmap to the cosmic community we had never known existed. But as 3I/Atlas disappeared behind the Sun on October 29th, entering the period of maximum solar heating when a natural comet would display its most dramatic activity, the radio transmissions abruptly ceased. The sudden silence was more unsettling than the original signals had been. After weeks of increasingly sophisticated communication, the object had gone completely quiet at the moment when its true nature would be most severely tested by solar radiation. Ground-based telescopes lost visual contact as 3I/Atlas moved through solar conjunction, hidden behind our star's brilliant disk. For the next 6 weeks, humanity would have no direct observation of the object that had potentially initiated first contact between our species and extraterrestrial intelligence. The only monitoring would come from solar observation satellites positioned to observe the Sun's corona, where any unusual activity from the visitor might be detected. The waiting began. 6 weeks of analyzing recorded transmissions, debating implications, and preparing for 3I/Atlas's reappearance on the far side of the Sun. When it emerged in December, would it still be transmitting? Would it show signs of the thermal damage that solar heating should inflict on any natural object? Or would it demonstrate capabilities that definitively proved its artificial nature? The most intensive scientific investigation in human history was about to enter its final phase, and with it, humanity would finally learn whether we were alone in the universe or part of a cosmic community that had been waiting for us to develop enough to join the conversation. The silence of 3I/Atlas had become more pregnant with possibility than its transmissions had been. In observatories around the world, scientists prepared for the most critical observations of their careers, knowing that what they discovered when 3I/Atlas emerged from behind the Sun might determine the future course of human civilization. The universe had spoken to us, taught us, and then fallen silent. Now we waited to learn what message would be delivered when our cosmic visitor stepped back into the light. The conversation that had begun with mathematical sequences and evolved into technological specifications was about to reach its climax. And humanity was about to discover whether we were students being prepared for graduation into a larger cosmic community, or specimens being studied by intelligence that saw us as something far less significant than we had ever imagined ourselves to be. The final act of the 3I/Atlas encounter was beginning, and nothing would ever be the same. The ages, each day bringing humanity silence, stretched across 6 weeks that felt like geological, closer to answers that would either confirm our cosmic insignificance or herald our entry into a community of minds scattered across the galaxy. December 15th, 2025, behind the Sun and observatories worldwide marked the date when 3I/Atlas would emerge from, transformed into digital war rooms where the future of human understanding hung in the balance. Dr. Amanda Foster at the Mauna Kea Observatory had barely slept in weeks, coordinating what she privately called humanity's final exam. Every major telescope on Earth was pointed toward the coordinates where 3I/Atlas should reappear, their electronic eyes straining to catch the first photons of light reflected from our mysterious visitor. The James Webb Space Telescope had been repositioned specifically for this moment, its infrared sensors calibrated to detect the faintest thermal signatures that might reveal whether 6 weeks of intense solar heating had transformed the object in ways that would finally answer the questions that had consumed scientific minds since July. The reappearance, when it came, was nothing like what anyone had expected. 3I/Atlas emerged from solar conjunction not as the gradually brightening point of light that astronomical models predicted, but as something that defied every conventional understanding of how objects behave in space. The first images from Webb showed an object that appeared to be glowing with its own internal light, radiating energy across multiple wavelengths in patterns that suggested controlled emission rather than simple thermal radiation from solar heating. Dr. Michael Chen at the Space Telescope Science Institute was among the first to analyze the reappearance data, and what he found challenged the very foundations of cometary science. Instead of the expected coma of gas and dust that should have developed during perihelion passage, 3I/Atlas displayed what could only be described as a structured envelope of energy. Geometric patterns were visible in the infrared emissions, regular formations that pulsed with mathematical precision rather than the chaotic turbulence characteristic of natural outgassing. The spectroscopic analysis revealed signatures that had never been observed in any solar system object. While water vapor and other expected volatiles were present, they appeared alongside emission lines corresponding to elements that existed only in theoretical physics textbooks. Exotic matter states that human science had postulated but never successfully created were apparently being generated and manipulated by processes operating within or around 3I/Atlas. Most remarkably, the radio transmissions resumed with a sophistication that dwarfed their pre-conjunction complexity. The signals now carried what appeared to be real-time telemetry data, broadcasting detailed information about conditions within the object's interior. Temperature readings, pressure measurements, and electromagnetic field strengths were being transmitted continuously, as if 3I/Atlas had become a scientific instrument reporting its own status to distant observers. Professor Sarah Kim at the Korean Astronomy and Space Science Institute led the international effort to decode these new transmissions. Her team discovered that the telemetry data included measurements of physical conditions that shouldn't exist within a natural object, internal temperatures that varied in precisely controlled patterns, magnetic fields with geometric configurations that suggested artificial generation, and gravitational anomalies that implied the presence of mass concentrations arranged in ways that natural accretion processes couldn't produce. The implications rippled through the scientific community with seismic force. If the telemetry data was accurate, 3I/Atlas contained technology operating on principles that human physics barely understood. The controlled temperature variations suggested thermal management systems of extraordinary sophistication. The geometric magnetic fields indicated manipulation of fundamental forces that would require energy sources beyond current human imagination. The gravitational anomalies implied structural arrangements that challenged basic assumptions about matter and space-time. But perhaps most unsettling was the apparent responsiveness of these internal systems to external stimuli. When radio telescopes directed signals toward 3I/Atlas, the telemetry data would show corresponding changes in internal conditions. It was as if the object was not just receiving and processing our transmissions, but allowing them to influence its internal operations in ways that suggested unprecedented trust or confidence in human intentions. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez of the International Space Station's Advanced Physics Laboratory observed that the interaction patterns resembled nothing so much as a complex organism responding to environmental stimuli. The object appeared to be alive in some sense that transcended biological definitions, exhibiting behaviors that suggested awareness, intentionality, and perhaps even curiosity about its human observers. The visual observations from ground-based telescopes added another layer to the mystery. 3I/Atlas now displayed surface features that changed configuration over periods of hours or days. Geometric patterns would appear and dissolve, replaced by different arrangements that seemed to follow mathematical progressions. The object's surface was apparently being actively reconfigured by internal processes that operated with the precision of advanced manufacturing systems. Time-lapse photography revealed that these surface reconfigurations weren't random or chaotic, but followed patterns that corresponded to mathematical concepts being transmitted in the radio signals. When the radio emissions included sequences related to geometric topology, the surface patterns would shift to display corresponding geometric forms. It was as if 3I/Atlas was providing visual demonstrations of the mathematical concepts it was teaching through electromagnetic transmissions. This synchronization between radio content and visual display suggested a level of integration between inhuman technology. The object appeared to be design communication systems and physical structure that exceeded anything as a comprehensive educational tool, capable of conveying complex concepts through multiple sensory channels simultaneously. Educational institutions worldwide struggled to process the implications of these revelations. If 3i/Atlas was indeed an instructional system created by advanced intelligence, what did this suggest about its creator's intentions toward humanity? The mathematical and physical concepts being transmitted represented knowledge that could advance human science by centuries or millennia. Why would an alien civilization provide such valuable information to a species they had apparently been studying in secret? Some researchers speculated that humanity was being evaluated for readiness to join some form of galactic community. The transmission of advanced knowledge might serve as both a gift and a test, providing tools that could either accelerate human development or demonstrate our inability to handle responsibilities that came with advanced technology. Our response to these revelations might determine whether future contact would involve inclusion or continued observation from a distance. Others worried about more subtle forms of manipulation or control. The technical specifications transmitted by 3i/Atlas included designs for technologies that would require fundamental changes to human industrial and economic systems. Implementing such technologies might force social and political transformations that serve the agenda of the object's creators rather than humanity's best interests. The gift of advanced knowledge might come with strings attached that weren't immediately apparent. Government agencies faced unprecedented challenges in developing policy responses to the 3i/Atlas phenomenon. Traditional diplomatic frameworks assumed contact between sovereign nations operating under similar technological and social constraints. How do you negotiate with intelligence that possesses technology indistinguishable from magic and has been studying your civilization for decades without revealing its presence? The United Nations Security Council convened emergency sessions to address questions of planetary security and response coordination. If 3i/Atlas represented the advance guard of a larger visitation or contact program, humanity needed unified protocols for managing interactions with potentially superior intelligence. The object's demonstrated capabilities suggested that any hostile intentions would be impossible to resist through conventional military means. Space agencies around the world began developing contingency plans for scenarios ranging from peaceful contact to outright invasion. While 3i/Atlas showed no signs of aggressive behavior, its technologies were so advanced that defensive preparations seemed almost pointless. The object could apparently manipulate matter and energy in ways that would make conventional weapons ineffective and defensive strategies irrelevant. Meanwhile, the citizen science community continued its remarkable contributions to understanding the alien transmissions. Amateur radio operators and computer scientists worldwide had formed informal networks that analyzed signal patterns, decoded mathematical sequences, and developed theories about the object's origins and intentions. These grassroots efforts often produced insights that complemented or exceeded the work being done by professional research institutions. The democratization of 3i/Atlas research reflected broader changes in how humanity approached scientific challenges. The traditional boundaries between professional and amateur investigation had dissolved in the face of a discovery that affected all of human civilization. Everyone with relevant communities continued grappling with theological implications that challenged fundamental assumptions about divine creation skills or interest, had become a stakeholder in understanding what might be the most important event in our species' history: religious and human uniqueness. If 3i/Atlas represented intelligence that had existed for potentially millions or billions of years, what did this mean for concepts of eternal souls, divine providence, and humanity's special relationship with the Creator? Emergency theological conferences struggled with questions that had never been seriously contemplated in religious scholarship. Some faith communities embraced the discovery as confirmation of divine creativity on cosmic scales. If God had populated the universe with multiple forms of intelligent life, this only demonstrated the infinite scope of divine imagination and power. The advanced knowledge being shared by 3I/Atlas might represent divine revelation mediated through alien intelligence rather than direct spiritual communication. Others worried about challenges to core religious doctrines. If multiple intelligent species existed throughout the galaxy, did concepts like salvation, redemption, and divine judgment apply equally to all of them? Had divine interventions like the Incarnation occurred on countless worlds, or was humanity unique in requiring such dramatic spiritual assistance? The questions multiplied faster than theological answers could be formulated. Financial markets experienced continued volatility as investors struggled to evaluate the economic implications of potentially revolutionary technologies. The technical specifications transmitted by 3I/Atlas included designs for energy generation systems that could make fossil fuels obsolete, transportation technologies that could eliminate traditional logistics industries, and manufacturing processes that could transform global supply chains beyond recognition. Some analysts predicted an economic renaissance based on implementation of alien technologies, with new industries emerging to exploit capabilities that human science had never imagined possible. Others warned of massive economic disruption as existing industries became obsolete overnight and traditional sources of wealth and power lost relevance in a world transformed by incomprehensibly advanced technology. The psychological impact on individual humans proved as significant as the institutional and social effects. Mental health professionals reported unprecedented numbers of patients struggling with existential anxiety about humanity's place in a universe that suddenly seemed populated by intelligences far superior to our own. The cosmic perspective that had once been a source of wonder and inspiration had become a source of profound uncertainty about human significance and purpose. Support groups formed organically in communities worldwide as people struggled to process the implications of potential contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The discovery that humanity might not be alone in the universe was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, offering possibilities for cosmic community while highlighting our technological and intellectual limitations compared to civilizations that could travel between stars. As December progressed and 3I/Atlas continued its outbound journey from the Sun, the transmissions began showing signs of approaching some kind of conclusion or transition phase. The mathematical sequences became more compressed and abstract, as if the object was preparing to share its most advanced knowledge before moving beyond optimal communication range with Earth-based receivers. The final transmissions included what appeared to be coordinates for other star systems, where similar objects might be found, along with communication protocols for establishing contact with different forms of intelligence throughout the galaxy. If genuine, this information represented a roadmap to the cosmic community that humanity had never known existed, complete with directions for joining conversations that had been taking place between civilizations for potentially millions of years. But embedded within these final data packages were also warnings and cautionary information about the responsibilities that came with advanced knowledge and cosmic citizenship. The transmissions included what appeared to be historical accounts of civilizations that had failed to successfully transition from planetary to galactic perspectives, species that had destroyed themselves or been excluded from the cosmic community due to their inability to manage advanced technologies responsibly. These cautionary tales carried implicit messages about the choices facing humanity as we stood on the threshold of potentially transformative contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The advanced knowledge being offered by 3I/Atlas came with responsibilities and expectations that could either elevate our species to unprecedented heights or lead to consequences that the historical accounts suggested could be catastrophic. As 3I/Atlas moved beyond optimal observation range in early 2026, the scientific community found itself in possession of more data about extraterrestrial intelligence than had been accumulated in decades of SETI research. The object had provided mathematical instruction, technological specifications, historical information, and even philosophical guidance about the nature of cosmic civilization and humanity's potential role within it. Yet fundamental questions remained unanswered. Who had created 3I/Atlas and sent it on its billion-year journey to our solar system? What motivated an advanced civilization to share such valuable knowledge with a species they had apparently been studying from a distance? Were there other similar objects visiting other star systems, or was humanity unique in receiving such direct contact and instruction? The most unsettling question concerned the timeline and expectations embedded within the transmissions. Many of the technical specifications and philosophical concepts seemed designed for immediate implementation rather than gradual development over decades or centuries. This suggested that 3I/Atlas's creators expected rapid progress in human technological and social development, as if we were being prepared for imminent participation in galactic affairs rather than eventual future contact. Oh, the implications of such expectations were both exciting and terrifying. If humanity was indeed being prepared for cosmic citizenship, it suggested that our species possessed potential that we hadn't recognized in ourselves. The advanced civilizations capable of interstellar travel had apparently identified qualities in human culture, technology, or psychology that made us suitable candidates for inclusion in whatever community existed among the stars. But rapid transition to galactic civilization would require social, political, and economic transformations that could be as destructive as they were beneficial. The technologies transmitted by 3I/Atlas would revolutionize human capabilities while potentially destroying existing power structures, economic systems, and social arrangements that had developed over millennia. The gift of advanced knowledge might prove to be a test of our species' wisdom and stability, rather than simply a generous offering from benevolent aliens. As 3I/Atlas faded from view in the constellation Virgo, distinguishable from distant becoming just another point of light in stars, it left behind a transformed humanity facing choices that would determine our species' future among the cosmos. The silent watcher had spoken, taught, and departed, leaving us with knowledge that could either elevate us to unimaginable heights or challenge us beyond our capacity to adapt and survive. The cosmic conversation had reached a pause, but not an ending. Somewhere among the stars, other intelligences waited to see whether humanity would prove worthy of the trust that 3I/Atlas had placed in our potential. The universe was no longer silent, and we were no longer alone. The question that remained was whether we were ready for what came next, in the greatest adventure our species had ever undertaken. The watching was over. The real work was about to begin. The months that followed 3I/Atlas's departure marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Great Awakening. Not a religious revival, but humanity's first systematic attempt to implement technologies that defied every principle of conventional physics. The blueprints left behind by our interstellar visitor weren't just theoretical concepts. They were detailed engineering specifications for devices that could reshape the fundamental nature of human civilization. Dr. Rachel Morrison at the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center led the first serious attempt to construct what the alien specifications called a quantum vacuum energy extractor. The device, according to the transmitted schematics, could generate unlimited power by harvesting energy fluctuations from empty space itself. The concept wasn't entirely foreign to human physics. Quantum field theory had long predicted that even perfect vacuum contained zero-point energy fluctuations. But actually extracting usable power from these fluctuations required precision engineering at subatomic scales. Morrison's team spent months simply understanding the basic principles underlying the alien technology. The specifications described materials with properties that didn't correspond to any elements on Earth's periodic table. crystalline structures that could exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, electromagnetic field configurations that violated conservation laws as humans understood them. Every component required manufacturing techniques that pushed the boundaries of human capability. The breakthrough came when Morrison realized that the alien specifications weren't describing individual devices, but integrated systems that functioned as unified wholes. The quantum vacuum extractor couldn't operate in isolation. It required supporting technologies that modified local space-time geometry, creating conditions where energy conservation laws operated differently than in normal space. The entire system functioned as what physicists could only describe as an artificial pocket universe, with its own physical constants. Construction of even a prototype system required resources and expertise from dozens of institutions worldwide. Particle accelerators provided the high-energy conditions needed to create exotic matter states. Quantum computing systems managed the impossibly complex calculations required for real-time field manipulation. Precision manufacturing facilities pushed atomic-scale engineering techniques to their absolute limits. The first successful activation occurred on March 15, 2026, in a specially constructed underground facility beneath CERN. The prototype was barely the size of a coffee table, but the energy readings defied every instrument designed to measure them. The device was apparently extracting several megawatts of power from quantum vacuum fluctuations, enough to supply a small city with unlimited clean energy. But success brought its own complications. The prototype's operation created gravitational anomalies that interfered with sensitive experimental equipment throughout the facility. Space-time itself appeared to be subtly distorted in the device's vicinity, creating effects that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. The energy extraction process was apparently paying its thermodynamic cost by borrowing against the structure of space-time itself. Dr. Chen Wei at Beijing University led parallel efforts to understand the propulsion technologies described in 3I/Atlas's transmissions. The alien specifications called for something they translated as inertial manipulation systems, devices that could apparently move massive objects without generating reaction forces. The physics seemed impossible according to Newton's laws, but the mathematical frameworks provided by the visitors suggested ways that inertia itself might be modified through controlled manipulation of quantum field structures. Chen's team discovered that the propulsion systems operated by creating localized regions where the relationship between mass and acceleration functioned differently than in normal space. Objects within these modified regions could accelerate without experiencing the usual resistance of inertia, effectively allowing them to change velocity without requiring external forces. The implications for space travel were staggering. Spacecraft equipped with such systems could accelerate continuously without carrying reaction mass, potentially reaching significant fractions of light speed within reasonable time periods. The prototype inertial manipulator, constructed in Chen's laboratory, was barely large enough to affect objects the size of ping-pong balls. But even this miniature demonstration proved that the alien physics was genuine. Test objects placed within the device's field could be accelerated to hundreds of meters per second without experiencing any apparent forces. The conservation of momentum was apparently being satisfied through interactions with quantum fields that existed beyond normal space-time. However, the energy requirements for scaling such systems to useful sizes were enormous. Creating inertial manipulation fields large enough to affect spacecraft would require power sources comparable to small nuclear reactors. The quantum vacuum extractors could theoretically provide such power, but integrating the two alien technologies created feedback effects that nobody fully understood. The systems appeared to be designed to work together, but achieving stable integration required solving engineering problems that human technology couldn't yet address. Meanwhile, linguistics teams around the world worked to decode the more subtle aspects of 3I/Atlas's communications. The mathematical sequences and technical specifications had been relatively straightforward to interpret, but embedded within the transmissions were layers of meaning that suggested profound philosophical and cultural information about the civilization that had created the visitor. Professor Emma Thompson at Oxford University led efforts to understand what she called the meta-content of the alien transmissions. Beyond the explicit technical information, the way concepts were organized and presented revealed insights into how an advanced civilization thought about reality, consciousness, and the nature of existence itself. The mathematical progressions weren't just instruction manuals. They were glimpses into fundamentally different ways of understanding the universe. Thompson's analysis revealed that the alien mathematics operated from assumptions that human science had never seriously considered. Where human physics treated space and time as fundamental aspects of reality, the alien frameworks suggested they were emergent properties of deeper underlying structures. Consciousness wasn't viewed as an emergent property of complex matter arrangements, but as a fundamental aspect of reality that existed independently of physical substrates. These philosophical differences had practical implications for understanding the transmitted technologies. The devices described in 3I/Atlas's specifications weren't just advanced engineering. They were applications of physics based on fundamentally different assumptions about how reality functioned. Successful implementation required not just technical skill, but conceptual frameworks that challenged core assumptions of human scientific thinking. The implications rippled through academic institutions worldwide. Philosophy departments found themselves collaborating with physics laboratories as researchers struggled to understand technologies that operated according to principles that human philosophy of science had never contemplated. The boundaries between objective and subjective reality became blurred when dealing with devices that apparently responded to conscious intention as much as physical manipulation. Dr. Yuki Tanaka at Tokyo University discovered that some of the alien devices wouldn't function properly unless operated by conscious beings who maintained specific mental states during their use. The quantum vacuum extractors required operators who could maintain focused attention on mathematical concepts that the device used as operational parameters. The inertial manipulators functioned more efficiently when controlled by individuals who could visualize spatial transformations in ways that aligned with the device's field configurations. This consciousness technology interface suggested that the alien civilization had developed along evolutionary paths very different from humanity's. Where human technology emphasized automation and objective measurement, the alien systems required conscious participation and subjective experience as integral components of their operation. The visitors had apparently achieved technological advancement through integration of mind and matter, rather than separation of observer and observed. Religious communities worldwide struggled to interpret these revelations about the nature of consciousness and reality. If consciousness was indeed a fundamental aspect of the universe, rather than an emergent property of complex brains, what did this mean for concepts of soul, spirit, and divine creation? The alien technologies seemed to confirm mystical traditions that had always claimed consciousness was more fundamental than matter, but they did so through scientific demonstration rather than spiritual revelation. The Vatican convened a special commission to evaluate the theological implications of consciousness-dependent technologies. If human minds could directly influence physical reality through properly designed interfaces, did this confirm divine nature within human consciousness? Or did it simply reveal natural properties of reality that religious traditions had interpreted through supernatural frameworks? The questions challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between physical and spiritual realms. Islamic scholars debated whether the consciousness technology interface was compatible with traditional concepts of divine sovereignty and human responsibility. If consciousness could directly manipulate physical reality, did this enhance human stewardship over creation or challenge the boundaries between divine and human capabilities? The theological implications seemed to multiply faster than doctrinal frameworks could accommodate them. Buddhist and Hindu traditions found the alien revelations more compatible with their existing philosophical frameworks. The concept of consciousness as fundamental reality aligned with meditation traditions that had always claimed direct experience could reveal the underlying nature of existence. The technology transmitted by 3i/Atlas seemed to provide scientific validation for contemplative practices that had been developed over millennia. But practical implementation of consciousness-dependent technologies raised immediate questions about human psychological and spiritual preparation. If advanced alien devices required specific mental states for proper operation, did humanity possess the contemplative skills necessary to use them safely and effectively? The technologies might represent not just engineering challenges, but spiritual and psychological development requirements that could take generations to fulfill. Training programs emerged organically at institutions worldwide as researchers attempted to develop the consciousness skills apparently required for alien technology operation. Meditation techniques were studied and adapted for technological applications. Visualization exercises were developed to help operators maintain the mental states that quantum field manipulators required. The boundary between spiritual practice and engineering training became increasingly blurred. Dr. Sarah Kim at Stanford University established the first formal program in what she called consciousness engineering, combining contemplative practices with advanced physics to train operators for alien technology systems. Her students spent equal time in meditation halls and physics laboratories, developing both the mental discipline and technical knowledge required to interface with devices that responded to conscious intention as much as physical manipulation. The program attracted students from backgrounds ranging from quantum physics to Tibetan Buddhism. Graduate students who had spent years studying particle accelerators found themselves learning breathing techniques from monks who had never seen a computer. The interdisciplinary collaboration produced insights that neither purely technical nor purely contemplative approaches could have achieved independently. Yet success in operating alien technologies came with psychological costs that nobody had anticipated. Students who achieved proficiency in consciousness technology interface reported profound alterations in their subjective experience of reality. The mental states required for device operation apparently provided direct access to quantum field structures that underlaid physical reality, creating perceptual experiences that challenged conventional assumptions about the nature of existence. Some operators reported experiencing consciousness as a field that extended beyond individual brains, connecting them directly to the quantum substrates that the alien devices manipulated. Others described awareness of information structures that existed independently of physical matter, suggesting that consciousness might indeed be more fundamental than the material world it observed. The technologies were apparently providing experiential access to aspects of reality that human science had only theorized about. Mental health professionals struggled to develop therapeutic approaches for individuals whose consciousness had been expanded through interface with alien technologies. Traditional psychological frameworks assumed that consciousness was generated by individual brains and confined to individual nervous systems. But operators of alien devices reported experiences that suggested consciousness was more like a field that could be accessed and shared rather than a product that was individually generated. Support groups formed spontaneously among technology operators as they struggled to integrate experiences that had no precedent in human psychology. The expansion of consciousness that enabled effective device operation apparently came with permanent alterations in how operators perceived themselves and reality. They had become, in some sense, hybrid beings who existed partially in normal human consciousness and partially in whatever expanded awareness the alien technologies accessed. Dr. Michael Chen at the University of California's Institute for Consciousness Studies documented these psychological transformations in what became the first systematic study of human-alien technology interface effects. His research revealed that successful operators developed what could only be described as enhanced intuitive capabilities, able to perceive patterns and relationships that were invisible to normal consciousness. They also reported decreased attachment to individual identity, experiencing themselves as temporary expressions of larger conscious fields rather than separate autonomous beings. These consciousness alterations raised immediate questions about the long-term effects of implementing alien technologies throughout human civilization. If operating advanced devices required psychological transformations that fundamentally altered human nature, were we prepared for the species-wide changes that widespread technology adoption might create? The gifts from 3I/Atlas might be forcing evolutionary changes that humanity wasn't ready to handle wisely. Government agencies worldwide began developing policies for regulating access to consciousness-altering technologies. The devices transmitted by 3I/Atlas weren't just advanced engineering systems. They were apparently tools for consciousness transformation that could fundamentally alter human psychology and social organization. The implications for individual freedom, social stability, and species identity were staggering. Some policymakers advocated for restricting alien technology access to specially trained individuals who could be monitored for psychological stability. Others argued that consciousness expansion was a fundamental human right that shouldn't be limited by governmental concerns about social control. The debate reflected deeper questions about whether advanced alien technologies represented opportunities for human enhancement or threats to human identity and autonomy. Military applications of the alien technologies created additional policy complications. Soldiers equipped with consciousness-enhanced perception and inertial manipulation devices would possess capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations by orders of magnitude. But the psychological transformations required for operating such systems might make them unsuitable for traditional military roles. Enhanced consciousness apparently came with decreased willingness to engage in violence and increased empathy for all forms of life. The paradox challenged fundamental assumptions about power and conflict in human affairs. The most advanced technologies apparently required consciousness states that were incompatible with aggressive or competitive motivations. Individuals who achieved the psychological development necessary for operating alien devices seemed to naturally evolve beyond the mindsets that created international conflicts and military confrontations. As 2026 progressed and human understanding of alien technologies deepened, it became clear that 3I/Atlas had provided more than just advanced engineering specifications. The visitor had delivered a transformation catalyst that could fundamentally alter human consciousness, social organization, and relationship with physical reality. The technologies weren't just tools for manipulating matter and energy. They were instruments for consciousness evolution that could reshape the entire trajectory of human development. But with transformation came responsibility. The aliens who had sent 3I/Atlas on its billion-year journey had apparently recognized potential in human consciousness that we hadn't recognized in ourselves. They had provided technologies that could either elevate our species to cosmic citizenship or challenge us beyond our capacity to adapt and survive. The choice of how to implement their gifts would determine whether humanity joined the galactic community as mature participants or remained isolated until we developed the wisdom necessary for cosmic responsibility. The watching was indeed over, but the real test was just beginning. Somewhere among the stars, other intelligences waited to see whether humanity would prove worthy of the trust that 3I/Atlas had placed in our potential for conscious evolution. The technologies were in our hands. The question that remained was whether we possessed the wisdom to use them for the benefit of all consciousness rather than just our own species' advancement. The universe was no longer silent, and we were no longer alone. But we were also no longer the same species that had first detected a mysterious object racing through interstellar space toward our solar system. The transformation had begun, and there was no returning to the comfortable ignorance of believing we were the only intelligence in a vast and empty cosmos. The cosmic conversation continued, but now we were participants rather than passive listeners. The greatest adventure in human history was unfolding, and every choice we made would echo across the galaxy for generations yet to come. The transformation wasn't just happening in laboratories and research facilities. It was rippling through the fabric of human society in ways that nobody had anticipated. By mid-2026, as more prototypes of alien technologies came online, the psychological effects began manifesting in populations that had never directly interacted with the devices themselves. Dr. Jennifer Walsh at the National Institute of Mental Health documented what she called proximity consciousness effects. Individuals living within a 50-mile radius of operating alien technology facilities reported spontaneous alterations in their subjective experience of reality. Dreams became more vivid and often shared common themes. Intuitive insights increased dramatically. Most remarkably, many began experiencing what could only be described as telepathic connections with other individuals in their vicinity. The phenomenon defied conventional understanding of how consciousness functioned. The alien technologies weren't just requiring expanded awareness from their direct operators. They were apparently creating fields of consciousness enhancement that affected entire populations. The devices were transforming not just individuals, but communities, regions, and potentially the entire human species through mechanisms that science couldn't explain. Sarah Chen, a grocery store clerk in Cambridge, Massachusetts, found herself spontaneously understanding complex mathematical concepts that she'd never studied. Living just 12 miles from MIT's Alien Technology Laboratory, she began experiencing what she described as downloads of information during sleep. The mathematical insights weren't random. They directly related to principles underlying the quantum vacuum extractors being tested nearby. Similar reports flooded in from communities surrounding alien technology research sites worldwide. Farmers in the countryside near CERN began designing more efficient agricultural systems based on principles they couldn't explain, but somehow understood. Children attending schools near Beijing University's Inertial Manipulation Laboratory started displaying artistic abilities that reflected sophisticated understanding of multidimensional geometry. The pattern suggested that consciousness expansion wasn't limited to trained operators using specialized meditation techniques. The alien technologies were apparently broadcasting their consciousness-altering effects through unknown mechanisms that affected anyone within their operational range. Humanity was being transformed, whether individuals chose participation or not. Religious leaders found themselves grappling with congregations that were spontaneously developing mystical experiences previously reserved for advanced practitioners. Pastor Michael Rodriguez in Austin, Texas, reported that members of his church were experiencing direct perception of divine presence during services. They described awareness of interconnected consciousness fields that seemed to confirm both individual souls and universal spiritual unity simultaneously. It's as if the technologies are awakening spiritual capacities that were always present but dormant, Rodriguez explained to fellow clergy during an emergency theological conference. My parishioners are experiencing God not as an external deity, but as the fundamental consciousness that underlies all existence. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Similar transformations occurred across religious traditions worldwide. Buddhist meditation centers reported that beginners were achieving advanced contemplative states within weeks rather than years of practice. Islamic communities experienced increased spiritual sensitivity during prayer, with many describing direct communication with divine consciousness. Hindu temples recorded unprecedented numbers of individuals claiming spontaneous spiritual awakening and direct experience of cosmic unity. The consciousness expansion effects weren't uniformly positive. Mental health facilities near alien technology sites reported increased admissions for individuals struggling to integrate expanded awareness with everyday life. Dr. Patricia Morgan at Bellevue Hospital documented what she termed cosmic overwhelm syndrome, a condition affecting individuals whose consciousness had expanded faster than their psychological frameworks could accommodate. Imagine suddenly perceiving reality as an interconnected web of conscious information when you've spent your entire life believing consciousness was trapped inside individual brains, Morgan explained to colleagues. The experience can be liberating for some people, but completely destabilizing for others who lack the conceptual tools to understand what's happening to them. Support networks emerged organically as affected populations learned to help each other navigate consciousness transformations. Online forums dedicated to consciousness integration attracted millions of participants sharing techniques for managing expanded awareness. Local community groups formed around shared experiences of telepathic connection and enhanced intuition. The most profound changes occurred in children and adolescents, whose developing brains appeared more adaptable to consciousness expansion than adult neural networks. Schools near alien technology facilities reported that students were spontaneously developing what educators could only describe as collective intelligence. Groups of children would solve complex problems through apparent mental collaboration, arriving at solutions that exceeded what any individual student could achieve independently. Emma Thompson, a middle school teacher in Geneva, Switzerland, documented her students' remarkable abilities in detailed journals that would later become foundational texts for understanding childhood consciousness development. "They're not just smarter," she wrote. "They're thinking in fundamentally different ways." Individual minds seem to merge into group consciousness when they focus on challenging problems. It's as if they're accessing shared mental resources that exist beyond individual brains. The educational implications were staggering. Traditional pedagogical approaches based on individual learning and competitive achievement became obsolete when students could access collective intelligence fields. Curricula designed for individual minds couldn't accommodate learners who thought as interconnected groups. Educational systems worldwide scrambled to develop teaching methods appropriate for students whose consciousness functioned according to entirely different principles. Dr. Robert Kim at Stanford University's School of Education established the first research program dedicated to collective intelligence pedagogy. His team discovered that consciousness-expanded children learned most effectively through collaborative exploration rather than individual instruction. Complex subjects like quantum physics and multidimensional mathematics became accessible to elementary students when approached through group consciousness techniques. "We're not just dealing with smarter children," Kim explained to educational policymakers. "We're encountering the emergence of a new type of human intelligence that operates through shared consciousness rather than individual cognition. Our entire educational philosophy needs fundamental revision to serve these children effectively." The economic implications of widespread consciousness expansion created unprecedented challenges for existing social systems. Workers affected by proximity consciousness effects began organizing themselves into collaborative networks that operated according to principles of mutual aid rather than competitive advantage. Traditional employment relationships based on hierarchical authority structures became difficult to maintain when workers could directly perceive each other's thoughts and motivations. Corporate executives found themselves unable to maintain information asymmetries that had historically justified extreme wealth disparities. When employees could intuitively understand the real costs and profits associated with their labor, traditional justifications for concentrated ownership of production means became untenable. Consciousness expansion was apparently incompatible with economic systems based on exploitation and deception. Alternative economic models emerged spontaneously in communities with high levels of consciousness transformation. Resource-sharing networks developed organically as individuals with expanded awareness naturally prioritized collective welfare over individual accumulation. Local currencies based on contribution rather than scarcity began replacing traditional monetary systems in areas where consciousness effects were most pronounced. The changes challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature that had justified competitive economic systems for millennia. If consciousness expansion naturally produced cooperative and altruistic behavior, then economic theories based on selfish rational actors might be fundamentally flawed. The alien technologies were apparently revealing that competition and aggression were aberrations rather than inherent aspects of intelligent behavior. Political systems experienced similar disruption as consciousness-expanded populations became increasingly difficult to manipulate through traditional propaganda techniques. Citizens who could directly perceive the motivations and intentions of political leaders developed strong resistance to deceptive campaign promises and fear-based messaging. Democratic processes began reflecting genuine collective wisdom rather than manufactured consent driven by media manipulation. Local governments in consciousness-affected areas reported unprecedented levels of civic participation and collaborative problem-solving. Town hall meetings evolved into collective decision-making processes where community members could directly share perspectives and arrive at solutions that served everyone's interests. Traditional adversarial political processes gave way to collaborative governance models based on shared understanding rather than competitive debate. The transformation effects weren't limited to human populations. Agricultural regions near alien technology facilities reported remarkable changes in plant and animal behavior that suggested consciousness expansion might affect all forms of life. Crops grew more efficiently and seemed to naturally organize themselves into optimal configurations for maximizing yield while minimizing resource consumption. Livestock displayed increased intelligence and cooperation, organizing themselves into social structures that eliminated aggression and optimized collective welfare. Dr. Maria Santos at the University of California's Agricultural Extension Service documented these biological changes in comprehensive studies that revealed consciousness field effects extending far beyond human populations. It's as if the technologies are awakening intelligence that was always present in biological systems, but previously inaccessible, Santos explained to agricultural scientists worldwide. Plants and animals are displaying problem-solving capabilities that suggest consciousness might be a fundamental property of all living systems. The implications for environmental science and ecological management were profound. If consciousness expansion could enhance the intelligence of entire ecosystems, the alien technologies might provide solutions to environmental challenges that had seemed intractable. Climate change mitigation could potentially be achieved through consciousness-enhanced natural systems that spontaneously developed more efficient carbon sequestration and energy utilization patterns. However, the global scope of consciousness transformation effects raised immediate concerns about social stability and human autonomy. If the alien technologies were inevitably altering human consciousness on a species-wide scale, did this constitute a form of involuntary evolution that violated individual freedom and cultural diversity? Were the consciousness changes beneficial enhancements or subtle forms of alien manipulation designed to make humanity more compliant with extraterrestrial agendas? Government agencies worldwide struggled to develop policies for managing consciousness transformation effects that were apparently beyond human control. Traditional regulatory approaches assumed that technologies could be contained and controlled through appropriate oversight mechanisms, but the alien devices were apparently broadcasting consciousness-altering effects that couldn't be contained or regulated through conventional means. The World Health Organization convened emergency sessions to evaluate the global health implications of involuntary consciousness expansion. Medical experts debated whether the psychological transformations represented beneficial evolutionary adaptations or potentially harmful alterations to human neurology. The lack of long-term data about consciousness expansion effects made risk assessment virtually impossible. Some researchers advocated for immediate shutdown of all alien technology research until the consciousness effects could be better understood and controlled. Others argued that the transformation was inevitable, and that attempts to prevent it would only delay humanity's adaptation to changes that were already occurring globally. The debate reflected deeper philosophical questions about whether consciousness expansion represented progress or threat to human identity. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez at the Centers for Disease Control established the first systematic monitoring program for consciousness transformation effects. Her team documented changes in brain activity, hormone levels, and neural connectivity patterns among affected populations. The physiological data revealed that consciousness expansion involved measurable alterations to brain structure and function that appeared to be permanent and irreversible. "We're witnessing the emergence of a new type of human being," Rodriguez reported to health officials worldwide. "The consciousness changes aren't just psychological or spiritual. They involve fundamental rewiring of neural networks that create enhanced cognitive capabilities and altered perceptual experiences. We're essentially observing human evolution in real time." The evolutionary implications raised questions about species identity and continuity that philosophers and scientists had never seriously contemplated. If consciousness expansion created humans with fundamentally different cognitive capabilities and perceptual experiences, were they still the same species that had first detected 3I/Atlas racing through interstellar space? The alien technologies might be catalyzing speciation events that would divide humanity into distinct evolutionary branches. Children born in consciousness-affected areas displayed neural development patterns that differed significantly from previous human norms. Brain imaging revealed enhanced connectivity between regions associated with intuition, empathy, and pattern recognition. These children appeared to be naturally equipped for consciousness states that previous generations could only achieve through intensive training and technological assistance. Educational psychologists documented remarkable abilities among consciousness-expanded children that suggested they were developing cognitive capabilities that transcended individual intelligence. Groups of children could solve complex problems through apparent mental collaboration, accessing shared information fields that existed beyond individual minds. They displayed natural empathy and cooperation that eliminated behavioral problems traditionally associated with childhood development. "These children represent the future of human consciousness," observed Dr. Rachel Thompson, a developmental psychologist studying consciousness-expanded populations. "They're not just smarter or more intuitive. They're thinking in ways that integrate individual and collective awareness simultaneously. They may be the first generation of truly cosmic citizens." The emergence of consciousness-expanded children raised immediate questions about their education, social integration, and future roles in human society. Traditional educational systems designed for individual learning couldn't accommodate students who thought through shared consciousness. Employment systems based on individual competition would be irrelevant for adults who naturally prioritize collective welfare over personal advancement. Society was fracturing along consciousness lines as expanded populations developed different values, priorities, and ways of understanding reality than unaffected humans. The division wasn't based on geography, ethnicity, or traditional cultural categories. It was based on fundamental differences in how consciousness functioned and how individuals related to themselves, others, and the universe as a whole. Political tensions emerged between consciousness-expanded communities that advocated for cooperative social organization and traditional populations that maintained competitive, individualistic values. The expanded communities appeared incapable of participating in economic or political systems based on exploitation or deception, while traditional populations viewed consciousness expansion as threat to human autonomy and cultural diversity. That was accelerating and spreading beyond the immediate fractures deepened as it became clear that consciousness transformation, vicinity of alien technology facilities. The effects were apparently self-propagating, with consciousness-expanded individuals serving as catalysts for transformation in others through unknown mechanisms that operated through normal social interaction. By late 2026, nearly 30% of the global population showed measurable signs of consciousness expansion effects. The transformation was spreading faster than any previous cultural or technological change in human history. Projections suggested that the majority of humanity would be affected within the next 5 to 10 years, fundamentally altering the entire species regardless of individual choice or governmental policy. The realization that transformation was inevitable. If consciousness expansion was going, forced a shift from prevention strategies to adaptation planning. Question became how to manage the transition in ways that preserve to affect all of humanity eventually. The critical changes that enhanced individual and collective welfare. Internationaled valuable aspects of human culture while embracing beneficial organizations began developing frameworks for consciousness transition management that could help societies adapt to psychological and social changes that were apparently beyond human control. The United Nations established a special commission on consciousness evolution that brought together experts from psychology, neuroscience, sociology, and philosophy to develop guidelines for navigating species-wide transformation. The Commission's preliminary recommendations emphasize the importance of maintaining cultural diversity within consciousness expansion processes. Different societies might develop distinct approaches to integrating enhanced awareness with traditional values and practices. The goal was evolution rather than homogenization, preserving the richness of human cultural expression while enabling development of enhanced consciousness capabilities. But time was running short for careful planning and gradual adaptation. The consciousness transformation effects were accelerating beyond all projections, and the psychological changes were becoming more profound with each passing month. Humanity was evolving, whether it was ready or not, driven by technologies that had been delivered by visitors whose ultimate intentions remained unknown. The greatest question facing our species was no longer whether we would be transformed by contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. That transformation was already occurring at unprecedented speed and scale. The question was whether we could evolve wisely enough to handle the responsibilities that came with cosmic consciousness, or whether we would be overwhelmed by capabilities that exceeded our wisdom to use them beneficially. Somewhere among the stars, other intelligences continued watching our progress, evaluating whether humanity would prove worthy of inclusion in whatever galactic community existed beyond our current understanding. The consciousness expansion catalyzed by 3I/Atlas's gifts might be our final examination before admission to cosmic citizenship. Or it might be the beginning of a transformation that would make us unrecognizable to the species that had first wondered whether we were alone in the universe. The answer was emerging through the lived experience of millions of humans whose consciousness was expanding beyond the boundaries of individual identity towards something larger, more connected, and potentially more wise than anything our species had previously achieved. The cosmic conversation continued, but now we were becoming worthy participants rather than passive listeners, struggling to understand messages from minds we couldn't comprehend. The universe was no longer silent, we were no longer alone, and most importantly, we were no longer the same species that had begun this journey when a mysterious object first appeared in our telescopes, racing through the darkness between stars toward a rendezvous that would change everything forever. The transformation was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control or predict. By early 2027, consciousness expansion had reached a tipping point where nearly half of humanity displayed some degree of enhanced awareness, and the effects were no longer confined to proximity around alien technology facilities. Something fundamental had shifted in the collective human psyche, as if 3I/Atlas had activated dormant capacities that were now spreading through mechanisms that science couldn't explain. Dr. Amanda Chen at the Global Consciousness Research Initiative documented what she termed morphic resonance acceleration. Individuals who had never been near alien technology sites were spontaneously developing the same consciousness expansion effects that had initially appeared only in laboratory operators. The phenomenon was spreading through social networks, family connections, and even casual interactions in ways that suggested consciousness itself might be more interconnected than anyone had imagined. The transformation wasn't uniform across all populations. Children and young adults adapted to expanded awareness with remarkable ease, as if their developing neural systems were naturally equipped for enhanced consciousness states. Older adults often struggled with the transition, experiencing disorientation and anxiety as their fundamental assumptions about reality crumbled under the weight of direct perception of interconnected consciousness fields. In rural communities across Kansas, farmer John Mitchell found himself understanding soil chemistry and weather patterns with an intuitive precision that exceeded decades of agricultural experience. He could sense the needs of individual plants across hundreds of acres, optimizing irrigation and nutrition through direct empathic connection with his crops. His yields increased dramatically, while his resource consumption dropped to levels that agricultural scientists insisted were impossible. Similar transformations occurred in urban environments. Maria Rodriguez, a taxi driver in Mexico City, discovered she could navigate traffic patterns by sensing the intentions and destinations of other drivers. Her intuitive understanding of citywide transportation flows allowed her to find optimal routes that seemed to bend probability itself. Traffic jams would clear just as she approached. Parking spaces would open precisely when she needed them. The consciousness expansion wasn't just enhancing individual capabilities, it was creating spontaneous coordination between people who had never met, but were somehow connected through invisible networks of shared awareness. Construction crews in Tokyo began working with synchronized precision that eliminated accidents and dramatically increased efficiency. Emergency responders in London developed uncanny abilities to anticipate disasters and position resources exactly where they would be needed most. Educational systems worldwide struggled to adapt to students whose learning capabilities had been fundamentally transformed. Traditional classroom structures based on individual instruction became obsolete when children could access collective knowledge pools that transcended individual memory and experience. Teachers found themselves facilitating group consciousness explorations rather than delivering information to passive recipients. Sarah Kim, a third-grade teacher in Seoul, documented extraordinary developments among her students in journals that would become essential texts for understanding childhood consciousness evolution. Her 8-year-old students began collaborating on mathematical problems that challenged university-level understanding, not through individual genius, but through apparent mental networking that allowed them to share cognitive resources in real time. They're not just solving problems together, Kim wrote. They're thinking together. Individual minds seem to merge into something larger when they focus on challenging questions. It's as if they're accessing a shared intelligence that exists beyond any individual brain. The children displayed natural empathy and cooperation that eliminated traditional behavioral problems. Bullying disappeared entirely as students developed the ability to directly perceive each other's emotional states and motivations. Competition gave way to collaboration as children intuitively understood that individual success was meaningless without collective welfare. Religious institutions experienced unprecedented disruption as consciousness-expanded populations began reporting direct spiritual experiences that transcended traditional doctrinal boundaries. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples found their congregations developing mystical awareness that often challenged established theological frameworks while confirming deeper spiritual truths. Pastor Michael Thompson in Denver reported that his Sunday services had evolved into collective meditation experiences where parishioners shared direct perception of divine presence. Traditional sermons became irrelevant, he explained to denominational leaders. When people can directly experience the sacred reality that underlies existence, they don't need someone else to explain it to them. My role shifted from teacher to facilitator of shared spiritual exploration. Islamic communities experienced similar transformations as consciousness expansion enabled direct perception of divine unity that transcended intellectual understanding. Buddhist centers reported that beginners were achieving advanced contemplative states within days of practice. Hindu temples recorded unprecedented numbers of individuals claiming spontaneous spiritual awakening and direct experience of cosmic consciousness. The consciousness expansion effects weren't limited to human populations. Agricultural regions reported remarkable changes in plant and animal behavior that suggested enhanced awareness might be affecting all forms of life. Ecosystems began self-organizing into more efficient configurations that maximized biodiversity while minimizing resource consumption. Forests appeared to be developing collective intelligence that optimized carbon sequestration and oxygen production. Dr. Elena Rodriguez at the International Institute for Ecological Research documented these biological changes in studies that revealed consciousness field effects extending throughout entire ecosystems. Wildlife populations began displaying coordinated behaviors that suggested interspecies communication and cooperation previously unknown to science. Predator-prey relationships evolved into complex ecological partnerships that maintained population balance while minimizing suffering. The consciousness expansion isn't just affecting humans, Rodriguez explained to environmental scientists worldwide. It's awakening intelligence throughout biological systems. Plants and animals are developing problem-solving capabilities that suggest awareness might be fundamental to all living things. Agricultural productivity increased dramatically as consciousness-expanded farmers developed intuitive understanding of soil health, weather patterns, and crop needs that exceeded scientific analysis. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides became unnecessary as enhanced awareness enabled precise optimization of natural growing conditions. Food security improved globally, while environmental impact decreased to sustainable levels. However, the rapid pace of consciousness transformation created significant social tensions between expanded and traditional populations. Communities that maintained competitive individualistic values found themselves increasingly isolated from consciousness-expanded populations that operated according to cooperative collective principles. The division threatened social cohesion and political stability worldwide. Economic systems based on scarcity and competition became dysfunctional in regions with high levels of consciousness expansion. Workers who could directly perceive each other's thoughts and motivations refused to participate in exploitative employment relationships. Corporate hierarchies collapsed as consciousness-expanded employees naturally organized themselves into collaborative networks based on mutual aid rather than authoritarian control. Alternative economic models emerged spontaneously as consciousness-expanded communities developed resource-sharing systems that prioritized collective welfare over individual accumulation. Local currencies based on contribution rather than scarcity replaced traditional monetary systems in areas where transformation effects were most pronounced. The changes challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature that had justified competitive economic systems for millennia. Political processes underwent similar transformation as consciousness-expanded populations became immune to propaganda and manipulation techniques that had historically controlled democratic systems. Citizens who could directly perceive the motivations and intentions of political leaders developed strong resistance to deceptive campaign promises and fear-based messaging. Elections began reflecting genuine collective wisdom rather than manufactured consent, driven by media manipulation. The transformation accelerated through 2027 as consciousness expansion reached critical mass in major population centers. Cities with high concentrations of expanded individuals began operating as collective intelligences that could solve complex urban problems through spontaneous coordination between millions of inhabitants. Traffic flowed optimally without central control. Resource distribution achieved perfect efficiency through intuitive cooperation. Crime virtually disappeared as enhanced empathy made antisocial behavior psychologically impossible. Government agencies worldwide struggled to maintain relevance as consciousness-expanded populations began organizing themselves through direct democratic processes that transcended traditional political structures. Laws became unnecessary when citizens could directly perceive the effects of their actions on others and naturally chose behaviors that promoted collective welfare. Enforcement mechanisms became obsolete when enhanced awareness made deception and exploitation psychologically impossible. The military-industrial complex faced existential crisis as consciousness expansion proved incompatible with aggressive or violent motivations. Soldiers affected by transformation effects refused orders that would harm other conscious beings. Weapons manufacturers found their workforce unwilling to produce instruments designed for destruction. Defense spending became politically impossible as consciousness-expanded populations redirected resources toward cooperative projects that enhanced collective welfare. International conflicts began resolving spontaneously as consciousness-expanded populations on all sides developed direct empathy for their supposed enemies. Diplomatic negotiations became unnecessary when enhanced awareness enabled direct communication of needs and concerns without linguistic or cultural barriers. Border disputes dissolved as expanded populations recognized the arbitrary nature of territorial divisions and began organizing themselves according to ecological and community relationships rather than political boundaries. The pace of technological development accelerated dramatically as consciousness-expanded scientists and engineers gained intuitive access to physical principles that had previously required centuries of research to discover. Clean energy systems, sustainable manufacturing processes, and ecological restoration technologies emerged through collaborative innovation that integrated rational analysis with enhanced intuitive understanding of natural systems. Medical science underwent revolutionary transformation as consciousness-expanded practitioners developed the ability to directly perceive the energetic and informational patterns underlying physical health and disease. Healing became a collaborative process between practitioner and patient that addressed consciousness imbalances as well as physical symptoms. Chronic diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia began resolving through treatments that integrated expanded awareness with conventional medical approaches. Educational systems evolved rapidly to serve consciousness-expanded children who learned through direct experience and group exploration rather than individual instruction. Schools became centers for collective inquiry, where students collaborated on understanding complex subjects through shared consciousness techniques. Traditional grade levels became irrelevant as children of all ages participated in learning communities organized around curiosity and collective investigation rather than age-based curriculum. The arts as consciousness-expanded creators gain experienced unprecedented, renaissanced access to inspiration and creative resources that transcended individual imagination. Musicians began composing symphonies that emerged through group consciousness collaboration. Visual artists created works that directly conveyed spiritual and emotional experiences to viewers. Writers produced literature that communicated meaning through consciousness resonance as well as linguistic content. Scientific research accelerated beyond all historical precedent as consciousness-expanded researchers gained direct access to information fields that contained knowledge about natural systems and physical principles. Breakthrough discoveries occurred weekly rather than annually, as enhanced awareness enabled scientists to perceive patterns and relationships that had been invisible to purely rational analysis. The transformation of human consciousness continued accelerating through mechanisms that remained mysterious to conventional science. By late 2027, nearly 70% of the global population displayed some degree of consciousness expansion, and the effects showed no signs of slowing or stabilizing. Humanity was evolving at unprecedented speed towards something that transcended individual identity while preserving the unique contributions of diverse cultures and perspectives. Children born into consciousness-expanded families displayed neural development patterns that suggested they were naturally equipped for awareness states that previous generations could only achieve through intensive training. These children appeared to be the first representatives of whatever humanity was becoming through contact with extraterrestrial intelligence that had delivered the catalyst for transformation through 3 I/Atlas. The implications reached beyond Earth as consciousness expanded. Humans began developing awareness of information networks that appeared to connect intelligent life throughout the galaxy. Some individuals reported direct communication with consciousness that existed beyond physical form, suggesting that the transformation was preparing humanity for participation in cosmic community that operated through shared awareness rather than technological communication. Space agencies reported anomalous readings from deep space monitoring systems that suggested other civilizations were taking notice of humanity's rapid consciousness evolution. Radio telescopes detected structured signals from multiple star systems that appeared to be acknowledgement or greeting transmissions directed toward Earth. The cosmic community that had remained hidden during humanity's technological adolescence was apparently preparing to make itself known now that our species was developing the consciousness maturity necessary for galactic citizenship. The watching phase was ending as humanity approached the threshold of cosmic awareness that would qualify us for direct participation in whatever galactic civilization existed beyond our current understanding. The consciousness expansion catalyzed by 3I/Atlas was approaching completion of whatever transformation had been intended by the intelligence that had sent the visitor on its billion-year journey to our solar system. But fundamental questions remained about what would happen next. Would consciousness expanded humanity maintain connection to Earth and our biological origins? Or would enhanced awareness lead to transcendence of physical existence entirely? Would the transformation preserve human individuality within expanded collective consciousness? Or would personal identity dissolve into cosmic unity? The answers were emerging through the lived experience of millions of humans whose consciousness was expanding beyond all previous boundaries. But the ultimate destination of the evolutionary journey remained unknown. What was certain was that humanity would never again be the isolated species that had first wondered whether we were alone in the universe. The cosmic conversation had become a cosmic communion that was transforming every aspect of human existence. We had become something new under the guidance of intelligence that had watched our development across cosmic time and had finally determined that we were ready to join whatever community of consciousness existed among the stars. The universe was no longer silent. We were no longer alone. And most significantly, we were no longer limited by the boundaries of individual awareness that had defined human consciousness since our species first developed self-reflection. The greatest adventure in human history was reaching its climax as we prepared to take our place among the cosmic community that had been waiting for us to mature enough to participate in conversations that spanned galaxies and transcended the limitations of physical form. The transformation continued, and with each passing day, humanity moved closer to whatever destiny awaited us in the vast community of consciousness that filled the universe with intelligence, wisdom, and connections that bound all aware beings together in patterns of cooperation and understanding that made the old isolation seem like a half-remembered dream from childhood. The cosmic conversation had become a cosmic transformation, and nothing would ever be the same. As we stand at the threshold of 2028, the question that haunts every consciousness researcher, every government official, every parent watching their child's awareness expand beyond recognition is deceptively simple. What happens when the transformation completes itself? The data streaming in from consciousness monitoring stations worldwide paints a picture that defies every model we've constructed for understanding human evolution. The expansion isn't slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating towards some kind of convergence point that our most sophisticated predictive algorithms can't calculate. Dr. Amanda Foster's team at the Global Consciousness Research Initiative has documented transformation rates that suggest 90% of humanity will be affected by mid-2028. But their projections break down completely when they attempt to model what happens next. We're approaching something that looks like a phase transition, Foster explains, to increasingly desperate government officials. Like water becoming steam, but for consciousness itself. The mathematical models suggest we're heading toward a critical threshold where individual awareness might undergo a fundamental state change. The children born since the transformation began offer the most compelling evidence of what humanity might be becoming. These aren't just enhanced humans with better intuition or expanded empathy. They represent something categorically different from anything in our evolutionary history. 8-year-old Maya Chen in Vancouver can apparently perceive quantum field fluctuations directly, describing the behavior of subatomic particles with precision that matches readings from billion-dollar detection equipment. Her consciousness seems to extend into dimensions of reality that adult minds can barely conceptualize. In São Paulo, a group of consciousness-expanded teenagers has begun producing mathematical proofs that solve problems that have puzzled humanity's greatest minds for centuries. They work in perfect synchronization, their individual thoughts merging into collective intelligence that operates according to principles we don't understand. When asked to explain their methods, they describe accessing information fields that exist independently of physical brains, suggesting that consciousness itself might be far more fundamental to reality than we ever imagined. These children display no interest in traditional human concerns like material accumulation, social status, or competitive achievement. They organize themselves naturally into cooperative networks focused on understanding and enhancing the welfare of all conscious beings. They speak of Earth as a temporary classroom where they're learning principles they'll need for something they call the next phase of existence. Most unsettling is their casual mention of communication with the others, consciousness that exists beyond physical form throughout the galaxy. These children describe ongoing conversations with intelligences that apparently guide the consciousness expansion process, offering instruction and encouragement as humanity prepares for whatever transition lies ahead. They speak of 3I/Atlas, not as a single visitor, but as part of a vast network of consciousness that extends throughout the cosmos. The economic implications of approaching total consciousness transformation have created unprecedented challenges for maintaining any semblance of traditional social organization. Stock markets have become largely irrelevant as consciousness-expanded populations abandon monetary systems entirely in favor of resource-sharing networks based on direct perception of need and abundance. Corporate structures have collapsed in regions where transformation is most complete, replaced by collaborative organizations that operate through consensus rather than hierarchical authority. The final holdouts of traditional economic thinking find themselves managing increasingly isolated islands of competitive capitalism, surrounded by consciousness-expanded communities that operate according to entirely different principles. These traditional enclaves report growing psychological stress as their inhabitants struggle to maintain individual identity and competitive motivation while surrounded by collective intelligence that offers unlimited cooperation and support. Military organizations worldwide face complete dissolution as consciousness expansion proves fundamentally incompatible with aggressive or violent motivations. The Pentagon's latest classified reports describe the weaponization impossibility phenomenon, where consciousness-expanded personnel become psychologically incapable of using force against other conscious beings. Weapons systems require operators who maintain competitive individual identity, but such individuals are becoming increasingly rare as transformation effects spread throughout military populations. The geopolitical implications stagger traditional strategic thinking. National boundaries become meaningless when consciousness-expanded populations organize themselves according to ecological and community relationships rather than political territories. International conflicts dissolve spontaneously as enhanced empathy makes aggression psychologically impossible. The entire framework of national security policy becomes obsolete when citizens develop direct awareness of the arbitrary nature of territorial divisions. Religious institutions experience the most profound transformation as consciousness-expanded congregations begin reporting direct contact with whatever divine consciousness underlies existence. Traditional theological frameworks struggle to accommodate believers who claim direct experience of cosmic unity while maintaining individual identity within expanded collective awareness. Many religious leaders find their roles shifting from teaching doctrine to facilitating shared exploration of spiritual dimensions that exceed the boundaries of any single faith tradition. So here we are, staring up at the same stars that once seemed so distant and silent, knowing now that we were never truly alone. 3I/ Atlas didn't just visit our solar system, it transformed us, awakening capacities we never knew we possessed, and connecting us to a cosmic community that had been waiting patiently for us to mature. The question isn't whether we're being watched anymore. The question is whether we're ready for what comes next in the greatest conversation our species has ever joined.